Robin also noticed that the level of Kaku was not comparable to the one she had encountered before. The Tekai, iron body, used by the previous person was weaker than used by Kaku. Whiz! Without hesitation, she jumped decisively and with the ability of flower fruit, Hana no Mi, she turned directly from the side of the roadway and disappeared. When Kaku saw this, he jumped in the air without hesitation. He lifted his foot in the air and used Geppo, moonwalk. He quickly found Robin and chased after her. Achenta Fleur, 8 flower, clutch. Noticing that Kaku was much faster than her, Robin took a deep breath and turned. She crossed her arms in front of her and clasped her 5 fingers sharply. After 7 months of practice on Sky Island, her strength is much stronger than before, not only with observation hockey but also with the development of the flower fruit. Hana no Mi. Petals are dancing. Countless arms gathered together and formed into 4 giant arms, trying to twist Kaku's head and break his neck. You have a lot of tricks. Feeling the power that binds him, Kaku's face changes slightly. Even if his Tekai, iron body, can block it, his muscles will get a little sprained, just like Bluenose. After breaking free of the entanglement of the convergent arms, Kaku jumped. His legs swung violently in the air as he kicked out 6 or 7 air blades with his legs in an instant that swept towards Robin. Rankyaku, Tempest Kick, Chaos. Robin's eyes flashed as she utilized observation hockey to capturing the trajectory of the air blades. Her slender waist gently twisted and she avoided every air blade. Kami-e, paper drawing. Seeing Robin avoid Rankyaku, Tempest Kick, Kaku was a little shocked, but he quickly reacted and rushed up toward Robin to fight her in close combat. However, Robin did not intend to fight Kaku. She crisscrossed her arms in front of her and used her power to trip Kaku. While he staggered, she ran to the distant street and rushed directly into the crowd. You can't escape. Kaku was angry. He also rushed into the crowd to catch Robin. He directly ran into the people and everywhere he went, whether ordinary people or nearby criminal organization gangsters, he hit them all and sent them flying. He couldn't use Geppo, moonwalk, to chase Robin. He had just used Geppo, moonwalk, and Rankyaku, Tempest Kick, against her and it resulted in him being tripped. Whiz! Whiz! Robin used observation hockey to capture the movements of the crowd. The extremely agile and precise movements made Kaku unable to catch up with her and even a gap gradually began to open between them. But when she thought that she had escaped from Kaku, a strong wind suddenly came from ahead of her. It was like a bullet-like finger, ruthlessly coming towards her. Marine's Rokushiki, Shigen, finger gun, whiz. At the critical moment, Robin suddenly became aware of the coming danger and moved her body to avoid the coming attack. After avoiding this attack, her face became a bit ugly as she had made a lot of noise and attracted the attention of her pursuer and his companions, and this person was not Blueno who she had first met, that is to say, there were at least 3 people from the other side. Hey, Kaku, chasing after a woman and almost letting her run away, you are not doing a really good job here. After Jabra's Shigen, finger gun, blocked Robin, he did not continue to attack her, but ridiculed Kaku who was rushing from the rear. After Kaku rushed over, he stopped and he narrowed his eyes angrily and yelled at Jabra. Shut up, I wasn't going to lose her and it was me who found her. If I hadn't come, she would have run away. Do you think that would be any different than you not finding her? Jabra snorted and folded his hands on his chest. Kaku was annoyed and they quarreled for a while. Robin glanced around and quietly retreated, trying to retreat into the chaotic crowd and slip away, but before she could take a few steps out, a voice suddenly came from behind her. You two can stop it. Lucci stepped out of the crowd, looked at Kaku and Jabra and said, catching Devilchild is just one of the missions, and there's more to be done. Although Kaku and Jabra still refused to glare at each other, they ended their quarrel. The 3 men stood in a triangle surrounding Robin in the center. Did you bring the sea-stone shackles? Lucci glanced at Robin and asked Kaku. Kaku shook his head and said, they are with Fukuro. Tell him to come here. Lucci calmly said and then looked at Robin again and said, I advise you to not do anything, although the orders were to catch you alive. I cannot guarantee that you will be without any injuries if you try to escape. Robin's arms were half raised and paused in the air, but after biting her teeth slightly, she crossed her arms and clasped her fingers violently. Trinta Fleur, 30 flowers, Shigen, finger gun. Almost at the moment when Robin started her ability, Lucci jerked forward with his right index finger stretched out like a bullet, wrapped in a strong wind that headed towards Robin. Robin was forced to give up on her ability to dodge Lucci's Shigen, finger gun. Shigen, finger gun. Spots. Lucci's face remained unchanged and his arm muscles tensed as one of his arms suddenly turned into a shadow and his fingers pounded towards Robin repeatedly, instantly sending out more than a dozen Shigen, finger gun. With the help of the observatory hockey, Robin's slender waists and legs tossed and rolled in this short instant, constantly avoiding Lucci's blows, but although she utilized observation hockey, her speed was far from Lucci's. After avoiding more than 10 Shigen, finger gun, in succession, her body was no longer able to respond to those attacks, even though she could still clearly capture the subsequent attacks. At this critical moment, the ground of this street suddenly shook under the influence of some kind of power. This shock made everyone stagger instantly and they became unstable. Lucci was forced to terminate his Shigen, finger gun, attacks to stabilize his body. CP9, hiding in the dark and attacking one of my crew members. At the end of the street, Ross came slowly, glancing indifferently across the field. Too much. That's too much. Even he didn't use his fingers to poke Robin yet. Listening to Ross directly identify their CP9 unit, Lucci's eyes flashed. World government has 10 intelligence agencies as subordinated, 8 of which are exposed on the bright side, that is CP1 to CP8. As for the hidden ones, CP9 and CP0 directly belongs to the Tenryubito and very few people know about them. According to common sense, no one should know the existence of CP9 except the government and Marine senior officials. Lucci glanced at the streets that had become empty. Instead of dealing with Robin, Lucci stood there indifferently, looking at Ross. It seems that the assassination plan has failed. The original plan was to first capture Robin and then start the assassination plan. Even if it fails, they would take Robin hostage and use her against Ross. But what they didn't expect is that catching a Robin was more troublesome than they thought, which led to the current situation. However, it's no big deal that the assassination plan failed because it was just a way to minimize the impact and silently erase the ghost hand pirates from the world. Now that they have met like this and with him, Kaku, and Jabra here, the assassination plan is changed to frontal combat. Kill Ghost Hand Ross and capture Devil Child Nico Robin. Ghost Hand Ross, we finally met. More than half a year ago, the mission to hunt you down was handed over to us. Where have you been in the past 6 months? Lucci looked at Ross calmly with a cold face. Take a guess. Ross responded faintly and walked over to Robin. Seeing that she had no scars or injuries on her body, he turned his eyes back to Lucci and others. At this time, Lucci, Kaku, and Jabra also stood together. Lucci stood in front, Kaku and Jabra stood on his left and right sides. I'm not interested in where you went, but because of your disappearance, we have very little time available for this mission. Lucci's tone was cold. Ross gently took off the leather cap on his head and said, that's a shame because it's a mission that is destined to fail. With a flicker of his finger, he lightly threw his hat to the top of a wooden pole near the street. The scene fell into silence. Robin stood on the left side of Ross, while Lafitte stayed on the right side of Ross, forming a one-on-one confrontation with the enemy. I know all about you and I feel sorry for your initial experience, but you will die here because you wantonly killed many Marines and you were opposing the world government. Lucci reached out and grabbed at his chest, pulled off a camouflage cloth that was draped outside, revealed the tight black windbreaker inside and looked calmly at Ross, saying, no matter how fierce of a pirate you are, no matter how powerful you are, it is impossible for a single pirate to oppose the world government. Whiz. The moment his voice fell, Lucci moved like a bolt of black lightning, showed much faster speed than Kaku and Jabra and instantaneously appeared in front of Ross, sweeping at Ross with one foot. Rankyaku, Tempest Kick, Sen. Line. The powerful foot force, which was not known to the ordinary people, directly kicked a huge chop and swept between Ross's chest and abdomen and even included Lafitte and Robin in the scope of the attack. Today, less than 9 years before Luffy went to sea, Lucci, and others in the original book hid their power for Pluton drawings in Water 7 and did not practice for 5 years. Today their strength is not much different from that time. Whiz whiz. Lafitte and Robin reacted quickly and retreated toward the side. Ross stood in place, without any intention of avoiding the coming attack. He raised his right hand and grabbed that coming wind blade that held enough power to cut a building, and Ross caught that attack with his bare hands. ZZ. The coming wind swipe touched Ross's palm and instantly turned into a tangible substance, making a nurturing sound, constantly bursting and trying to tear Ross's palm apart, tearing the layer of the power of distortion on Ross's palm. However, regardless of how this attack broke out, it was impossible for it to break the power of distortion on Ross's palm. This wind attack was held by Ross and in midair, and then he threw it away like a small snake. Sneer. The attack was thrown away by Ross and it landed on the top of a building on one side and cut off the whole upper part of the building. The upper part of the building collapsed and crashed into the street. I don't know if I can compete against the world government, but I do know that you are not enough to compete with us. Ross slowly put down his right hand. He didn't take a single step from beginning till now. Lucci stared at Ross and heard Ross's words. Instead of being angry, he said, "Really, anyone can talk big." Whiz. Whiz. During Lucci's confrontation with Ross, Kaku and Jabra quarreled again and charged towards their opponents, respectively. Kaku chose Lafitte directly because Robin was a woman, while Jabra decided to grab Robin to make fun of Kaku's pride. Kaku pulled out the two swords that had never been used. He would not treat Lafitte as carelessly as he did Robin, but he will consider him his opponent. Demon Sheriff, Lafitte, Lucci chose the strongest one and I don't want to fight a woman, so I'll have to let you be my opponent. Who, one of the hidden spy agencies of the government, CP9. I am very interested in you, now let's fight. Lafitte rotated the mahogany cane and the corner of his mouth was slightly raised as he politely accepted the fight. He's good at sneaking and hiding and he is naturally interested in members of the World Governmental Subordinate's secret espionage agency and wants to see how good they are. On the other side, Robin stood there with a cold face and stared at Jabra. She had no fear in dealing with CP9 members in a one-to-one manner. Gaha ha ha ha, left it to Kaku who couldn't even catch a single woman even though he chased you for half a day. If I can easily catch you, then Kaku will not be able to raise his head in front of me. Jabra looked at Robin with a funny and sly smile on his face. Whiz. 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 It seems that their minds are connected as 6 people attacked each other at the same time. When Lucci's previous attack did not work against Ross, he judged that Ross's strength was not normal and he would need to use all of his abilities. His body swelled at a rapid speed and in a flash, he was taller than Ross. He had a huge body shape with his muscles bulging. His skin was covered with a pattern of leopards and his fingers became leopard claws. Zone Nako Nako no Mi. Model. Leopard. Compared with countless messy devil fruit, the leopard-shaped fruit is among Zone's strongest, second only to the illusory and ancient devil fruit. Rankiaku. Gaicho. Victorious bird. Lucci whispered as he leapt up in the air. The powerful force under the leopard form was completely under his control. His legs and feet were like blades, splitting sharply at Ross's position. Buzz. In an instant, a huge chop, nearly 100 meters long, burst out from his leg and fell head-on towards Ross. This chop has enough power to destroy a large battleship in an instant. Kaku and Lafitte, who were fighting, were forced to leap further away under the enormous power of the blow. Such a great power. Robin looked at the street that had been torn apart in a moment and her face changed slightly. Just now she felt that Lucci's level was different from Kaku's and now it seems that her instincts were right. Not far from her left, Jabra laughed like a jackal. Although I don't want to admit it, Lucci's strength is the strongest among us. Not only that, but that fellow is the strongest person in the 800-year history of CP9. Great Age of Pirates in 13th year. Bang! In a moment of tremendous chopping, a trench of nearly 100 meters in length broke out in the street. However, Lucci, standing in the air with Geppo, moonwalk, did not show any relaxed expression but instead stared at the bottom with cold eyes. In the midst of the dusty street, Ross's figure gradually emerged. Ross was still standing in the same place, with a crack nearly 100 meters long, which was centered on him and was divided into 2 parts without any change in the ground beneath his feet. At this moment, Ross is holding his arm up and making a virtual grasping posture. As the dust gradually dissipates, he slowly withdraws his arm. Ross looked at the sky. It's a miscalculation. At that moment, because the attack came too fast and covered too much area, the moment it touched his palm, it fell to both sides of his body. It's like a whip is thrown on a nail, leaving a trail of whipping on both sides of the nail, but the small area where the nail is located is in a non-destructive state. I was going to throw it back, but it was broken all of a sudden. You're better than the Marine Vice Admiral I met, but I'm stronger. Ross calmly said and then suddenly disappeared, appearing over Lucci and kicking him with his foot. Lucci glared at Ross but did not avoid the coming attack and he also kicked towards Ross. Bang! Their feet collided in the air. Lucci's foot was wrapped in a strong wind, exerting his strong foot strength to the extreme. The blow was almost the same as that of Rankyaku, Tempest Kick. In terms of physical strength, Lucci in the leopard form is stronger than Ross, but Ross's strength comes from his body and not from a devil fruit. The two forces collided and surged in the air, making a tremendous noise that shook the surrounding area. Those who had already fled the street were shocked when they heard and felt the terrifying movement. Is this an earthquake? No, someone is fighting. Are you stupid? Can a fight between some people produce such a big movement? In horror and shock, countless people fled farther away. The loud voice alone forced them to cover their ears. Bang! A few seconds later, Ross and Lucci determined the strength and weakness of each other in just one move. Lucci's condensed attack was defeated by the power of distortion and Lucci could no longer stay in the air. He fell like a meteor on the ground and created a small crater on the ground. Not far from the fight, Kaku and Jabra were shocked seeing this scene. For the first time, they saw Lucci fall into a difficult position in a face-to-face confrontation. Although Ross had attacked from the top and Lucci has attacked from the bottom, and Ross's use of gravity can also be submitted as a reason for Lucci's defeat in this round, but Ross is the strongest person they have met so far. Cough. Cough. Lucci, who was thrown into the earth, was not badly injured. As early as he fell halfway down, he launched Tekai, Iron Body. His already stronger body got even stronger under Tekai, Iron Body, and it made his body much harder than ordinary steel, but his body also possesses the strength and toughness that steel did not possess. You are quite strong. Lucci jumped out of the hole that his body has made and looked at Ross suspended in the air and snorted. It is a delight for him to meet a powerful opponent that made his blood boil with fighting intent. Ross's face was expressionless and his figure flashed. He suddenly rushed towards Lucci. He was in the air and his punch had already fallen. Whiz! Lucci didn't confront Ross head on this time, but his figure flashed as he retreated and then he bent his fingers and slammed them into Ross's direction. Some small air bombs were ejected from his fingers and rushed towards Ross. Ross did not escape and allowed the small air bombs to hit his body. These air bombs only pierced some holes in his clothes and then all collapsed under the influence of the power of distortion, without any effect. This little trick doesn't work for me. Ross fell to the ground, looked at Rob Lucci with indifferent eyes, then raised his hands and gently closed them in front of him. Bang! The whole street shook violently and under the slightly shocked gazes of Jabra and Kaku, like two gates, with Lucci's location as the center, it burst open and then squeezed into the middle. Lucci's eyes flashed with danger and he tried to avoid the wide-range attack. To his surprise, the power of distortion transmitted from the ground beneath his feet and directly penetrated his feet, making his feet slightly numb and slowing down his escape. It was this slow step that made him instantly caught in the middle by the uplifted earth. It was like a tiny mosquito was caught between two huge iron walls. Ross's power of distortion has been able to touch his opponent's body directly through the earth. Although the power will be greatly weakened due to distance and multi-layered media, it can still cause some damage. Bang! The force of the blow was much greater than that of Tempest Kick, which Lucci had used before. The 100-meter-wide streets split from the center, then rolled over and squeezed into the center like waves, and even miles away its momentum was deafening. Lucci, it's too late. What the hell is this guy? The rest of the CP9 forces finally arrived at the battlefield at this time. They looked at the hill-like thing that was tens of meters high and nearly 100 meters wide, and they couldn't help but look at it in fear and surprise. Although after the government's heavy selection and trials, their physical fitness has become countless times better than that of an ordinary person. But this is the first time that they have witnessed such a scene where the street itself rose from the ground and formed a small hill. Kacha! Kacha! In silence, at the top of the hillside, mud and rocks cracked and burst apart. Lucci's figure jumped out and landed on the ground. Cough! Cough! Lucci coughed violently. He was bleeding from his mouth and his appearance was extremely bad. Fortunately, his physical body was very strong, and combined that with his devil fruit leopard shape and Tekai defensive power, his injuries were not serious. Ross has no expressions on his face as he stared at Lucci. Although he only used less than half of the power of distortion to cast the attack, Lucci's body in leopard shape was strong enough to withstand his attack with minimal injuries. If he can exercise his body to the limit, then it will be terrifying. His body will reach a level where even Whitebeard will not be able to resist the power of a single distorted punch. J. Lucci stretched out his finger and wiped the blood from the corners of his mouth. He looked at Ross in the distance with slight dignity and said, "It seems that our intelligence has misjudged your strength. But if your strength only ends at this level, you won't be able to win. That clumsy trick will not work a second time." Lucci, Bluno and others were relieved to see Lucci rushing out of the cracked, bulging, and folded hills. At the same time, someone shouted at him. Lucci glanced sideways at Bluno and others and murmured, "I don't require your help here. You and Kaku go and arrest Nico Robin as soon as possible. Don't let her run away." Bluno and others were still confident about Lucci. After looking at each other, they rushed towards Robin and Lafitte. "Don't be so arrogant to discuss your plans in the middle of our fight." Ross calmly stood there and the power of distortion suddenly broke out. The entire street was shaken as the earth and stones were rolled up like waves and they were pressed directly toward Bluno and Lucci and directly involved everyone in the attack. The momentum of this blow is even bigger than before. "Back off." Lucci's eyes flashed as he leapt in the air and after a few flashes of Geppo moonwalk, he crossed over and slammed his leg towards Ross. Rankyaku, Tempest Kick, Storm. Sneer. 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 In the blink of an eye, 7 or 8 choppers hit Ross head-on, trying to force Ross to stop his attack. Ross no longer controlled the rolling street and he raised his hand as his figure flickered and he caught all attacks in his hand. The attacks were like 7 or 8 invisible pythons which turned into a glowing sphere under the power of distortion. Whiz. Whiz. The gravity distortion was cast out and at the same time, Ross used Geppo moonwalk to close the distance between him and Lucci and he pressed the ball of light directly into Lucci's body. Lucci did not intend to compete with Ross. Instead, he appeared on Ross's right side and kicked him violently. Ross predicted ahead of time as he turned his arm around and continued pressing the light ball toward Lucci. Bang! Lucci's Rankyaku slammed into the light ball and the light ball collapsed as it slammed into the broken street, cutting the tops of several buildings. Ross's palm did not stop. At the moment when the ball of light collapsed, his 5 fingers clenched into a fist as he continued to throw a punch at Lucci. Whiz! At the moment when Lucci was about to collide with Ross, he used Geppo moonwalk to disappear from the front and appeared behind Ross. Shigen, fingergun. His fingers darted towards Ross's heart. Lucci's speed is much faster than that of Vice Admiral Dalmatian. After all, he is in Zone's leopard form and his physical strength is stronger than Dalmatian. However, even though Lucci is extremely fast, Ross with observation hockey can still react without getting injured by Lucci. Whiz! Ross's body slammed on one side, avoiding Lucci's Shigen fingergun, and he punched Lucci back. In the case of air combat, gravity distortion can greatly enhance his flexibility and speed, making his speed similar to Lucci. Lucci saw Ross react to several of his attacks and fight back. He gave up the attack and jumped to a roof. "Your response is not bad." Ross retracted his fist and looked indifferently at Lucci on the distant roof. Bluno and others are weaker than Kaku and Jabra. Although they have reached the battlefield near Robin, they are easily entangled by Lafitte. Only Kaku was about to lose his fight but with Bluno and other support he was able to compete with Lafitte. "Your abilities are too troublesome." Lucci's eyes were low. It seemed that he was fighting Ross with speed, but in fact, he had to use speed to avoid Ross's attack. Fortunately, Ross's speed is a little slower than his, otherwise, if his speed was comparable to his, Lucci's odds of winning will drop to near 0. Without any hesitation, Lucci's thoughts moved as the muscles on his body contracted and shrunk. He used life return, Seimei Kikon, to increase his speed at the expense of reducing his strength. Whiz! Ross did not speak anymore and with a sudden flash, he dived towards Lucci, folding his right hand into a fist and flung it out with a violent blow. Lucci dodged Ross's fist, flashed to Ross's side and switched back. Ross reached for his wrist and in a flash, the two men made dozens of moves in midair. Bang! Even though Ross is inferior to Lucci in terms of speed but with the flying ability of gravity distortion and with the speed of Geppo moonwalk, he is not much slower than Lucci in the case of air combat. After dozens of moves, Lucci fell towards the ground again. Ross did not pause. As soon as Lucci fell he swooped downward, chasing Lucci and pressing down his hand and gathering power of distortion in his palms. He could almost see the weak distribution curve formed in the air around him with the naked eye. Whiz! Lucci forcibly twisted in midair and fell dozens of meters away without being hit by Ross's palm, but Ross also fell to the ground the next moment. Almost in an instant, the soil around Lucci surged wildly and piled up and squeezed toward his position, and there appeared cracks in the earth as if the cover had been peeled off, taking Lucci's position as the center, forming a sphere. Ah! Lucci roared and his arms shook violently, breaking away from the state of life return, Seimei Kikon, tearing apart the crushing stones and dirt and struggling out of it. Almost at the moment Lucci rushed out, Ross was already waiting outside for him, his eyes calm and indifferent as he raised his fist and slammed it towards Lucci. Lucci couldn't escape the blow, but instead of panicking, he sank his face, folded his fists in front of him and pointed them at Ross's swinging fist. Rokushiki Ogi. Rokuogen. 6 Styles Secret Skill. 6 King Gun. Bang! Nearly surpassing the Sky Island's impact dial in power, this attack has more than enough power and it is concentrated on a single point. This attack and Ross's power of distortion collided against each other. This is the 6 Styles Secret Skill. 6 King Gun that condenses all the power into one point and does not have any negative after effects on the user's body. An extremely terrifying destructive power will erupt at a single point. However, when this kind of impact is concentrated in one point and encounters the chaotic power of distortions, it will not be able to maintain the state of convergence smoothly, but in the fierce conflict, it will collapse. Ross and Lucci were stagnating at the same time. Time seemed to be fixed for a moment. Then the whole street was centered on the place where the two confronted, setting off a terrifying aftershock. The air seemed to ripple and rush in all directions. The earth-shaking sound made Kaku and others in the fierce battle hundreds of meters away look sideways, and the movements of their hands stopped at the same time. Did he use the 6 Styles Secret Skill, 6 King Gun? It's the first time Lucci has been forced to this extent. CP0 is superior to all CP organizations, while CP9 is a covert organization which is second only to CP0 and higher than all other CP organizations. Lucci is known as the strongest person in the past 800 years, which means that his strength is absolute. Kaku and Jabra don't have their devil fruit right now. In the absence of the devil fruit, their power is half of Lucci, but once Lucci uses his devil fruit's ability, his power will become several times higher, and everyone in CP9 combined is not his opponent. Bang! In the aftermath, a loud sound echoed and the dust in the center swings away. Ross stands in place, motionless, and the ground beneath his feet shows traces of cobweb-like cracks. On the opposite side of Ross, Lucci failed to hold his figure. The impact of 6 King Guns was crushed by Ross's power of distortion, and he flew backward and crashed through one building and crashed into the second one. He blocked Lucci's 6 King Guns. How can it be? Seeing this scene, the pupils of Kaku and others contracted and their looks were slightly sluggish. Looking at the fierce battle between Ross and Lucci releasing the 6 King Guns, the gap between their strength should not be this much. Lucci back collided with the second building as he vomited blood and walked out of the hole he made in the building and looked towards Ross's direction. He couldn't understand. How could Ross's power rise so much at once? When he launched Tempest Kick, he was only slightly inferior. Just now, he released 6 King's Guns, intending to make a hard fight with Ross to create an opportunity to end the battle. Unexpectedly, he went all out to fight Ross hard, but he lost instead. You didn't use your full strength before. Lucci's face became extremely depressed and gloomy as he looked at the Ross standing on the broken street. To deal with Lucci, who is faster than him, Ross's plan of action is simple. First, he will fight with ordinary punches and then uses Distortion Fruit's ability to create a situation where Lucci can't use speed to avoid him, and then he will severely injure him. Yes. Ross looked calmly at Lucci. At first, he only used less than half of his power, and even with the last blow, he only used 80% of his power of distortion. Ross admires Lucci and CP9's intelligence gathering ability, and he wanted to see if he can use that ability for his own, so he did not actively try to kill Lucci and others. Otherwise he might accidentally kill Lucci by attacking him at his full power, and the situation will be unsalvageable. Whiz! The next moment, Ross's figure flickered as he charged towards Lucci. Lucci's body was attacked by the power of distortion. Even though most of it was counteracted by the impact of 6 King's Guns, and Lucci's body was extremely strong, but it still suffered serious injuries. In particular, under the influence of the power of distortion, he could not display Tekai, Iron Body. When he flew backward, he crushed a building with his back, and the impact injury was extremely serious. No way. Feeling the wounds of his body, Lucci knew that even if he used speed to avoid it, He would lose if he continued to drag it down. He took a deep breath and showed his determination in his eyes. Instead of choosing to avoid it, he put his fists together again. Using the power of life return, Seimei Kikon, to force down the injuries on the body. I don't plan to continue dragging it down, either. Seeing this scene, Ross's eyes were calm as his fingers folded into fists. Once again, the power of distortions in his body was completely stimulated by Ross and all of them converged on his fists. The air around his fists faintly presented a circle of distortion. Distortion fist. At the same time, Lucci also made a decisive move. He did not pay any attention to his injuries and all of his strength was completely focused on a single point. It was Lucci's strongest blow, and although it was performed in a state of near serious injury, it was almost as powerful as it was in its full-blown state, thanks to the ability of life return, Seimei Kikon. Sai Dai Rin. Rokuogen, Maximum Ring, 6 King Gun. Bang! Lucci's all-out punch and Ross's earnest punch collided with each other violently. It was as if time had been fixed at this instant. The impact of this explosion is far more than the Hashoken of the Sai of the Happo Navy that Ross encountered before. It exploded like a tough bullet, trying to break through the power of distortion blockade and penetrate Ross. But, under his control, Ross's power of distortions is also completely condensed in one point. It collides directly with the impact of the 6 King Guns. Lucci's 6 King Guns can't compete with Ross's power of distortions. They just stand still for a second and then completely break up. Crash. The aftermath of the collapse of 6 King's and the power of distortions almost instantaneously destroyed the upper part of the building where Ross and Lucci fought and then spread down all the way, completely destroying the whole building and shattering it into numerous splashes of rubble. Lucci's figure flies backward in the burst of rubble, smashing 3 buildings in a row before creating a crater on the ground. He coughed out blood from his mouth and he was no longer able to maintain the shape of leopard, restoring to his normal human form. Kaku and others have no time to support Lucci, or even if they could have time, their support will be useless. They can only watch Lucci and Ross' final attack in which Lucci was completely defeated. Lucci, lost. How could that be? That man's strength, even Lucci can't match it. Kaku and others made countless judgments before they acted against Ross. They even judged that Lucci may be defeated in his fight against Ross. After all, a Shichibukai was killed by the other side. But, nobody expected that Lucci would lose so fast. The entire battle was completely one-sided and Ross never gave any chance to Lucci to recover in the entire battle. There was silence. There was a dead silence. Lucci was defeated so quickly was a point they have not considered and they hadn't made any preparations for this scenario. At this point, only a Marine Headquarters Vice Admiral or CP0 can make any decision for them. Over the collapsed building, Ross floated in midair seemingly unaffected by the gravity and glanced calmly at Lucci, whose life and death was unknown and turned towards Kaku and others. This glance made Kaku and others fall into the ice cellar. Damn! On the ruined streets. Lucci, Kaku, Jabra and many other CP9 members were lying on the ground unconscious with serious injuries on their bodies. After Lucci lost to Ross, the battle outcome could not be reversed. Spandam, who had been on board, did not hesitate to leave Lucci and others and ordered his men to sail away, without even going ashore to explore the details of the battle. Is it hard for you to hypnotize them deeply? Looking at the CP9 members lying on the ground, Ross asked Lafitte. Regardless of CP9's battle ability, its intelligence collection ability is beyond doubt. If he can take over many members of CP9 and form the peripheral intelligence network of pirates, it will not be necessary for him and Robin to make painstaking efforts to collect intelligence in the future. They were selected and trained and brainwashed at a very young age until they formally join the government's intelligence agency. It's very difficult to hypnotize them deeply. Lafitte showed a helpless expression. Even with his ability, it was difficult to even brainwash the weakest members of CP9 organization. They hold extreme loyalty to the world government. Ross looked at the CP9 members lying on the ground, looking thoughtful, and suddenly asked, what if this loyalty collapses? Is there a possibility of deep hypnosis? Lafitte thought for a moment and said, that's a good way to try, with some certainty. Ross nodded and said, well, what are you going to do? Asked Robin. She could see that Ross intended to take over CP9, but it would not be so easy for a world government secret government intelligence agent to betray the world government. Ross had a smile on his face as if he were holding everything in his hand. I won't do anything. There is a great possibility that after the intelligence agents are defeated, the world government will choose to obliterate their existence. In addition, the chief of CP9 is a waste, and he will add fuel to fire to the failure of this operation to blame all the members of CP9. At Ross's words, Robin's eyes flashed. It turns out that you let the government ship leave here on purpose. She doesn't know how Ross knows about the chief of CP9, but since Ross says so, it's probably not wrong. Ross always knows something that doesn't seem to be known by anyone else. Robin even wondered if Ross was the head of a top-notch intelligence agency, but there weren't any signs of Ross contacting others. Holy Land Marijoy. This is the heart of the world government. At the top of this stately and elegant building, in a very spacious hall, 5 people, sitting or standing, are all serious-faced. They are the core of the highest power of the world government. One of them frowned and hit the table with his fist. It's them again, the Ghost Hand Pirates. Even CP9 couldn't handle them? Everyone's face was full of anger. For the high-ranking people like them, the Ghost Hand Pirates' name could not even reach their ears before they caused a huge storm. But the Ghost Hand Pirates caused a huge storm, killing Crocodile, who was one of the Shichibukai. This new rising power caused them some headaches. Different from the power of Yonko, 4 emperors. The Ghost Hand Pirates has no fixed place to stay, and they wander around the sea and even disappeared inexplicably for 6 or 7 months, and no one was able to find them. Even Marine Admiral Aokiji failed to find them. Every Marine Admiral is an extremely important battle force, not only to deal with all kinds of things in the Marine but to also protect the Tenryubito, and they are also needed to deal with the Yonko, 4 emperors. That can make a big mess at any time. It is impossible for a Marine Admiral to hunt a single pirate force in the Grand Line. That seemingly small hole has become bigger. These Ghost Hand Pirates must be disposed of as soon as possible. With their dangerous behavior, if they continue to grow, the consequences will be unimaginable. Ghost Shadow Ship. After dropping the seriously injured and comatose CP9 crew and letting Lafitte spy on them, Ross returned to the ship with Robin. It seems that you have made a decision. Looking at Law, who was standing at the deck, Ross calmly said, with his current strength and status, it is not absolutely necessary for Ross to recruit Law as the ship's doctor, but with Surgeon Fruit, his potential is undoubtedly the biggest. Law murmured, if you can kill Doflamingo, I can join you. Ross slightly smiled, and without answering he made a gesture towards Robin, then turned and walked into the cabin and disappeared. Robin watched Ross's back disappear into the cabin, and she turned to look at Law and held her chin in one hand and smiled. So, you can call him Captain the next time you see him. Law sighed. He didn't know whether the decision today was right or wrong, but since the decision has been made, he can only take a step forward. As Ross expected, Spandam put all the blame on Lucci and others in order to minimize his fault. Coupled with his father, world government's senior official Spandine manipulating the internal operations, the government finally issued a killing order on Lucci. CP9 itself is a hidden organization which is independent of CP1 to 8. Now, not only are they completely exposed, but they also failed to complete their mission, so the existence of Lucci and others naturally loses its meaning. Very soon, the CP9 crew was hunted down by North Blue Marine. Because Lucci was seriously injured in battle with Ross, and others were also injured, they could not resist the pursuit of Marine from North Blue Branch, so they could only use Blueno's ability to flee continuously. Although they have been brainwashed and are loyal to the world government since childhood, this does not mean that they will be willing to be disposed of by the government, especially when they are blackmailed by Spandam. For Ross, they have no hatred, they are not as powerful as him, and it was due to their luck that they managed to survive. All the anger they have has been transferred to Spandam. Spandam, that bastard, sooner or later I will let him pay the price. Somewhere in the shady corner of an island, the wounded, woeful CP9 crew are staying and resting, and Jabra is grinding his teeth in anger. Lucci sat there without saying a word. He lost his fight to Ross. He believed in dark justice. In his eyes, weakness is sin, but he is weaker than Ross. It won't work like this. We have to find a place to treat our injuries first. Khalifa watched Lucci's condition and the injuries and anxious expressions of the people present. Although they all had some first aid, they were not doctors after all. The injuries on their bodies could not be effectively alleviated and treated under the circumstances of Marine's constant pursuit. In particular, Lucci was severely injured and he has not yet recovered any battle strength. Some days ago, he even needed other people to help him. Only in these 2 days can he gradually walk by himself. If they can completely recover from their battle, let alone Lucci, Kaku, and Jabra, any one of the CP9 members are not afraid of Marine's pursuit from North Blue Branch, it will be easy enough for them to beat them down. In our current state, Marine will kill us once we show up. Fukuro shook his head. They are not very familiar with the environment of North Blue. Kaku murmured. The government and Marine's pursuit will not be obvious, ordinary civilians will not know about our affairs, the only problem is how to raise funds for treatment. They are not pirates nor gangsters. Although they secretly executed countless disobedient people for the government, they only acted on their orders. And just as the crowd was meditating, a voice suddenly came from the end of the lane. You don't need to raise any money to get treatment. This voice changed the faces of all the CP9 people present, especially Lucci, who had been sitting there with his head down. He raised his head sharply and looked in the direction of the voice. There. Ross has appeared in the alleyway without them noticing his presence. His eyes were calm as he walked slowly toward the CP9 who was hiding in the depths of the alleyway. It's you, Kaku, Jabra, and others with bottled strength stood up unconsciously and put on a defensive posture and stared at Ross with great vigilance. But when they thought of the fight between Ross and Lucci, which was not long ago, Ross defeated Lucci and crushed them easily, they could not help but feel powerless. Ross was not very tall, but as he came and stood there, he gave them a feeling of suffocation. The scenes that lingered in their minds cannot be forgotten. Did you come here to taunt the losers? Lucci walked slowly to the front of the crowd and looked calmly at Ross. Ross smiled and shook his head. No, I'm here for only one purpose. That's to give you two choices. What choices? First, work for me, or second, all of you can die here. Ross's voice was calm as it echoed in the dark lane. Kaku, Jabra, and others were angered and they said, what a joke, how can we work for a pirate? The choice is yours. Ross stood there calmly, without raising his eyelids. He said lightly, I want to remind you that you are not the CP9 of the government subordinates, but the fugitive pursued by the government. On the other hand, you should know all about me and the ghost hand pirates. My purpose has never changed, that is, hunting pirate. At Ross's words, Kaku and Jabra fell silent. Indeed. They are no longer the members of CP9, but the fugitives pursued by the government. Strictly speaking, there is no difference between them and Ross. As for Ross's second point, their information about Ross and the ghost hand pirates is clear. The ghost hand pirates never raided civilians but kept hunting pirates all the way. As for the murdered Marine, it was also a counterattack against the pursuit and suppression. If Ross is the kind of pirate that plunders civilians, there is no acceptable possibility for them to work with him at all, but the fact is that Ross's behavior is not essentially different from them to some extent. It's not our captain who led you to this situation. I think you know better than we do about the main person responsible for your current situation. Ha ha. Lafitte's figure appeared silently. Ross didn't intend to use words to conquer CP9. It was impossible to do it. At most, it will shake the hearts of the CP9 members. Lafitte's mission is to gradually pull them into the abyss of hypnosis when CP9's heart shakes. Spandam, that bastard, sooner or later I will make him pay the price for this. Under the psychological guidance of Lafitte, the faces of CP9 were full of anger, but this anger was not directed at Ross, but it was directed towards Spandam. He is greedy for life and is afraid of death. He always hides on the ship and does not come down. He let the Marines protect him, and after the failure of the mission, he turned his head and fled without even saving them, and he also dumped all responsibilities on them. Whoop, but if you deal with him, you will be going against the world government. Lafitte's voice seems to have some magic. CP9's members' heart wavered and the belief in the heart gradually collapsed. However, not everyone is gradually guided by Lafitte. One person stood at his original position without any changes in his expressions, whether it was Lafitte or the reactions of Kaku and others. He did not do anything. Rob Lucci. Weakness is sin, this is your point of view. Ross's faintly said. Lucci's will is stronger than he expected. Even now, he remains standing there without any expressions on his face, otherwise, he would have been affected by Lafitte. If Lucci at this time affects Kaku and others, it is likely to cause Lafitte's guidance failure, leading to an irreversible situation. But a weak person become your chief and control your destiny. Isn't this a very sad thing? Lafitte is constantly guiding Kaku, Jabra, and others, while Ross continues to talk to Lucci, shaking Lucci's heart with what he knows. Compared with other people in CP9, Lucci has more potential than all of them combined together. In the original series, he was defeated by Luffy. After being chased by the government, he actually returned and become the chief of CP0, and when he was able to fight Sabo, who ate flame fruit without losing any ground. Ross will recognize such strength and potential, he is even willing to let him join his official crew. I won't interfere with their choice. Lucci was silent for a moment, then suddenly he opened his mouth calmly. He knew what Ross is trying to do and knew what Lafitte is doing. It can't change him or affect him. He's still Rob Lucci, the strongest CP9 member in 800 years. He won't surrender to pirate or do anything for a pirate. However, he will not change the choices of Kaku and others. I am Rob Lucci. Weakness is a sin. If one day you can be stronger than the government, then you are just, but at least for now, you're not. I can be loyal to justice, but not to the enemy. Lucci's tone is calmly narrated. When it comes to this, his thoughts move and his body suddenly expands. It was a little difficult to enter the leopard form. You are the only qualified enemy I have encountered. Ross looked at Lucci and there were a slight regret and loss in his eyes. He said, if you had met me a year earlier, it would have been a suspenseful battle. Is that right? That's a pity. Lucci had a slight smile on his face as he pounced on Ross. Bang! Lucci's body stops and solidifies there with Ross's fist resting on his chest. Lucci, Kaku, Jabra, and others were shocked and puzzled. Lucci's body quickly recovered from Leopardman's form and fell aside. There were no new wounds on his body, but the internal organs of Lucci's body had already been crushed. This is really, Lafitte shook his head. Fortunately, he had almost completed the guidance and preliminary hypnosis. Lucci took the initiative to make a choice and didn't interfere with his work. Otherwise, he might lose a lot. Even so, he had to continue his work. Although Kaku and others were affected, their heart now has an even bigger flaw and he found an opportunity to invade it. On the other side, Ross slowly retracted his hand and shook his head. At the same time, a familiar voice was heard in his ear. Rob Lucci, the strongest CP9 member in 800 years, has been killed. A reward of 100 talent proficiency points and 1 point free talent points has been acquired. Looking at Lucci's body, Ross muttered to himself, whether it's life or death, you were worth it. You were indeed a qualified opponent. Unfortunately, I met you too late. The death of Lucci adds hatred to Kaku and others, but this hatred does not point to Ross, but to Spandam, even without Lafitte guidance. When Ross first beat them, he didn't kill Lucci, it was a decent defeat. After a while, the remaining CP9 members joined the Ghost Hand Pirates. Lafitte completed the final guidance. He slightly smiled while looking towards Kaku and others. He performed a long brainwashing and deep hypnosis, just in line with Law's treatment to Kaku and others to synchronize, to maximize their loyalty. Kaku and others did not speak, although they decided to join the Ghost Hand Pirates. They were all in a low mood because of Lucci's death. Very soon, the CP9 members and Ross returned to the Ghost Shadow ship. Law was responsible for healing the injuries they suffered and Lafitte for further brainwashing and hypnosis. A month later, Ghost Shadow ship returned to Grand Line with Kaku and others and placed them on a large island and issued a Den Den Mushi for contact. Ghost Hand Intelligence Organization has been created. At the same time, the world government changed the bounty amount of the Ghost Hand Pirates. Robin's bounty increased to 80 million berries and Lafitte's bounty became 120 million berries. As for the bounty of Ross, it was raised to 300 million berries. Bounty of 300 million berries. Before Ross, the top supernova in the first half of the Grand Line was a pirate named Bartra who had a bounty of 280 million berries. Now Ross has surpassed him in the first half of the Grand Line of this era. He has a bounty of 300 million berries which made him the top supernova. In the first half of the Grand Line, a supernova with a bounty of 100 million berries read the new wanted poster of Ghost Hand Ross and he couldn't help but blink repeatedly when he read the reward. Oh, 300 million, what a big deal. Sabo de Archipelago. Another supernova with a bounty of over 100 million berries, read the bounty order falling from the sky and slightly grinned. What a great guy, for someone who has completely angered the government and Marine and still lives to this day. It is unfortunate that he didn't meet us. A man next to him with a cigarette grinned and said, but we're going to the new world soon, let's see if that guy can live till he reaches the new world. On a piece of sea. Don Chinjiao, a bald man in a blue cloth, touched his bald head and looked angry. The younger generation man always runs around, but sooner or later this old man will find you. For the first half of the Grand Line, all the supernovas which held the bounty of over 100 million berries paid attention to this news. because in the first half of the Grand Line anyone who has a bounty of over 100 million berries will be able to survive in the New World, and they will have a chance to become one of the members in Yonko, 4 Emperors Pirates. Compared to it, in New World, there are many pirates with the bounty of over 100 million berries, but not many people will pay attention to this kind of news. Ghost Hand Ross's hanging bounty reaches 300 million. Don't you say that he had disappeared from the sea? What did he do now? Many people were shocked to find Ross's bounty order, which changed from 200 million berries to 300 million berries. As the government tried to cover up the CP9 accident, the news of Ross's defeat of CP9 in North Blue did not leak out. Few people knew the inside story. Although there is not much news about Ross, the change in the bounty order has caused some waves on Grand Line, and some forces who believe that Ross has been secretly dealt with by the government have once again focused their attention on them. Compared to other pirates, the Ghost Hand Pirates is undoubtedly regarded by the world government as a bone spike, a stab in the flesh that has to be removed. The government and Marines will never give up. They have raised the bounty on his head, and I am sure that Marines will continue to chase to either suppress or kill the Ghost Hand Pirates. Never had a pirates been able to shame the world government and Marines several times before they entered New World. Never had a pirates been able to survive the first half of Grand Line and reach New World after outraging the government and Marines. Ghost Shadow Ship. After placing CP9 and others on a large island in Grand Line, Ross gave them the first mission, which contained 2 submissions. First, to collect all the intelligence of Supernova Pirate in the first half of the Grand Line, especially those who have a bounty of over 100 million, their location and specific routes. Second is to collect all 7 warlords of the sea intelligence data, focusing on location information as well. I will kill some pirates in the first half of the Grand Line, but I need to hurry and go to the New World as soon as possible. Any future actions taken by the world government will include CP0, or Buster Call, or a Marine Admiral will personally come out. Ross stood on the deck and murmured as he watched the rolling sea. The exact existence of CP0 is not clear to Ross, but from the memory of Lucci joining CP0, their strength can be compared with a person who has eaten the flame fruit. They are the highest battle power in the organization. Their strength will not be much weaker than a Marine Admiral. Buster Call has 10 large battleships, 5 Marine Headquarters Vice Admiral and at least 10 Headquarters Rear Admiral, which are second only to CP0 and Marine Admiral. As for a Marine Admiral, the worst thing for Ross is to encounter a Marine Admiral. He is now strong enough to surpass the veteran Headquarters Vice Admiral, but still, the huge gap between him and a Marine Admiral cannot be erased even with the assistance of the proficiency points he gained after killing Lucci. Marine Admiral is almost at the peak of both body and hockey. There is no absolute shortcoming. Even Kizaru, which Zephyr calls its overdependence on fruit, has absolute capital to rely on fruit, and the speed of glittering fruit is too terrifying. Unlike Luffy, can a year or 2 be enough to reach a Marine Admiral's in strength? Ross pondered. His present situation seems to be at ease. In fact, it is at the edge of the cliff that he is likely to fall into the abyss at any time. If he wants to truly have the ability of self-protection, he must at least have the strength of a high-level cadre of Yonko, 4 Emperors, Pirates, or it will be even better if his strength is similar to a Marine Admiral. Thinking for a while, Ross shook his head and called out the talent system. After killing Lucci, he had not used the 100 talent proficiency points. Looking at the semi-permeable talent system interface, he thought about it and put 50 proficiency points on agility enhancement. Speed is his current weakness and shortcomings. If he did not conceal his strength and create opportunities to hit Lucci hard, even if he would win in the end, but it would be difficult for him to catch Lucci if he wanted to escape. Lucci was a lot faster than him, not to mention Marine Admiral. If he meets Kizaru, he can easily play Ross on the palm of his hand by using speed alone. Buzz. The golden light flashed in the panel of the General Department change. Agility enhancement. 200, top-level strengthening. Physical enhancement. 350, top-level strengthening. After filling in 50 talent proficiency points, agility enhancement rose from 150 to 200, crossing the threshold of top-level strengthening. After a burst of heat flowing through his body, Ross could almost clearly feel that his body had become extremely light and that lightness had no effect on his strength. Whiz. Whiz. He lifted his foot and utilized Geppo, moonwalk. He circled around the ghost shadow ship and returned to his original place. His speed was at least 50% higher than before. Such a surge will make up for the speed gap between Lucci and him in an instant, even slightly better than that. If he fought with Lucci with his current speed, then he would be able to defeat him in speed and he will not have any weakness. The remaining 50 talent proficiency points, Ross slightly thought and assigned 35 points to the observation hockey and 15 points to the distortion fruit. Buzz. The golden light illuminates from the bottom of the battle talents tree and it flashes all the way. Firearms shooting. 50 close combat fighting, 100. Distortion fruit. 405 Soru of Marines Rokushiki, 0. Kami-e, paper drawing, of Marines Rokushiki, 0. Marines Rokushiki's Geppo, moonwalk, 0. Observation hockey. 50 armament hockey, 0. Distortion fruit's proficiency breaks through the 400-point mark to 405 points, which fits in with the 7-month improvement in the Sky Island. As for observation hockey, it also reached 50 points and it has sword. With his full concentration, it is easy for him to perceive the action of Robin who is taking a shower in the bathroom. However, he can only perceive actions and can't see the full picture. I don't know if I can catch Kizaru's action now, but it should still be very difficult. As Ross adapted to the improved observation hockey, he thought and muttered to himself. Marine Headquarters. Aokiji sat yawning, rubbing his eyebrows in an office at the top of the fortress and said, "Arara, is there another one? The Ghost Hand Pirates are troublesome." Previously, he went to the sea for the Ghost Hand Pirates. He went out for a month and stayed outside for a month. He found nothing and finally returned without success. A Marine Admiral ran out alone for a month and accumulated a lot of things he needed to deal with. After returning, he was busy for a long time before he finished. Aokiji shook his head and couldn't help but think of Garp. Garp has repeatedly refused to be promoted to an admiral and even now he is still a vice admiral. Compared with admiral's position, vice admiral is much easier. It does not need to be responsible for Tenryubito's security, maintain Tenryubito's power, or supervise numerous marines subordinates to approve trivial matters in a sea. Right now he is a newly appointed admiral, so he is not as lazy as he was in the original series. He is doing his job as an admiral. Ozi Sea Area. Aokiji took out the sea map and looked at it for a moment. As a new marine admiral, he was responsible for a lot of trifles things of marines. If he ran out again and again for a single pirate group, Marine would be in a mess. However, CP9 was destroyed by Ross, Shichibukai Crocodile was also killed by him and the branch vice admiral was also unable to control the Ghost Hand Pirates. Even a headquarters vice admiral would be hard-pressed in dealing with Ross. He had to authorize a buster call. The strength of the Ghost Hand Pirates requires a buster call to deal with them. Headquarters vice admiral is also responsible for a lot of things. Mobilizing 5 headquarters vice admiral at one time and leading the army to leave headquarters to deal with the Ghost Hand Pirates will also have a great impact. It's really is a headache. Aokiji, with a pen in one hand and a chin in the other, fell into deep meditation and finally took out Den Den Mushi and silently gave several orders. Very soon, under the command of Aokiji, Marine headquarters took action and a total of 6 large battleships departed from headquarters. It's Vice Admiral Doberman and Vice Admiral Manga. 6 battleships and vice admirals, are they going to launch a buster call? Lieutenant Marine of headquarters was shocked to see the scene. Although Marine headquarters often had large battleship docked on its shore, but this time 6 battleships were departed at the same time, led by vice admirals and formed a fleet. Such forces were somewhat frightening. It's like a big war. On one of the battleships, the atmosphere was suppressed. Headquarters Vice Admiral Doberman walked up to the deck and pressed one hand on the hilt of his sword. His eyes looked coldly at the sea in front of him. "I'll make up for the mistakes I made. This time, I will execute you personally." Marine Headquarters Vice Admiral Doberman, working with several Headquarters Vice Admiral from Marine Headquarters, target Ghost Hand Pirates on the Grand Line. Half a month later, Ozi Sea Area. This is a sea on Grand Line, which covers 2 routes and consists of 5 islands. It is also called the Sea of Cherry Blossoms. The cherry trees on 5 islands in the sea are very flourishing. At the edge of one of the islands, the Ghost Shadow ship is briefly docked. A pirate of over 100 million bounty is in this sea, but it is not yet clear which island he is at. Kaku and others are exploring intelligence through various channels in the underground world. In the practice room of Ghost Shadow ship, 2 figures are doing exercises, one is Ross and the other is Law. After boarding the Ghost Shadow ship and discovering Ross's practice methods, Law quickly joined in on those practices. Although he has become a ship doctor of the Ghost Hand Pirates and Ross has confirmed that he will deal with Doflamingo, he will not put all his hopes on others. In order to handle Doflamingo, he will naturally improve his strength as soon as possible. Law, who is a few months away from the age of 16, doesn't need to mention the gap between his and Ross's physical fitness. Right now he can only carry Ross's lightest weight and do physical exercises. In the other corner of the practice room, Ross not only carries a huge load 10 times more than Law's but also used his gravity distortion to support himself with double gravity. After the proficiency of the power of distortions reached 400 points, Ross reached a new step for the displacement of gravity, which directly affected the gravity. Naturally, there's still a big gap between his gravity distortion and the gravity devil fruits. Today, he's trying to stimulate gravity distortion and can at most utilize triple of normal gravity, far less than Fujitora, let alone pulling a meteorite from the sky. With the ability of double gravity, Ross's physical exercise effect has become obvious again. The special floor of the practice room can also bear Ross's maximum load with. Ross and Law were doing almost synchronous movements, squatting heavily, but every time Ross squatted, he could feel the mountain like heavy pressure. On the other side, Law seemed a little silly doing those exact movements with the same expression. The only thing that was almost the same was the look in their eyes. The eyes of Ross and Law are very similar, both have their own goals, and their hearts are firm and unshakable. What they have to say is that Ross's eyes are slightly different from Law's. In his tough eyes, there is a hint of indescribability. Bang! Ross completed a set of squats and retracted the gravity distortion ability before putting the huge load aside. He sat on the floor gasping for breath. Almost at the same time, Law couldn't hold on and he threw away the load, leaned against the back wall and gasped violently. And just then, after receiving the latest intelligence from the Peripheral Intelligence Organization, Robin found Ross, who was practicing in the practice room. Captain Ross, the intelligence has come. They have determined the position of the moving weapons craze Bartra with the bounty of 160 million berries. Oh! Ross stood up and took a deep breath to maintain his image and looked at Robin. Robin first reported the intelligence in her hand and then asked Ross, "So, should I contact our navigator now?" Ross nodded and said, "Notice Lafitte that as soon as the magnetism of the log pose is full, he is to come back to the ship. Our goal is Spring Island and I don't want my prey to run away. The pirates who have the bounty between 100 million and 200 million berries are good hunting targets for him. Even if he hunts a pirate with the same amount of bounty a second time, he will acquire 40 talent proficiency points, which is a considerable improvement, and there is also a probability of gaining free talent points. He now has 2 free talent points. For the time being, he doesn't plan to mess around with them. The proficiency of the distortion fruit has reached 405 points. It is not far away from 600 points. At that time, the free talent points will be needed to activate the distortion space ability, and that ability will require more than 3 free talent points. For Ross, the first half of the Grand Line is a free map. Even if he killed pirates wantonly, he won't provoke any of the Yonko, 4 emperors, after entering the New World. The pirates are either Shichibukai or they are under the banner of Yonko, 4 emperors. Even if he is able to stall the Marines and the government long enough to enter the New World unharmed, he would face the situation of New World's 4 emperors separatist regime. If he wants to rise in that sea, then he would have to confront a Yonko, 4 emperors. Before that, Ross had to safely break into New World under the bloody and ruthless pursuit of Marine and the government. This road is extremely difficult, but, as long as he stepped over, he would be very close to standing on the top of the sea. Spring Island. It is one of Ozzy's 5 cherry blossom islands and one of the most prosperous islands. The climate on the entire island is spring all year round, so it is also known as the Spring Island. On a certain street in the Spring Island, there is a totally different atmosphere from the flowing cherry blossoms, tension, depression, and fear. What are you going to do? This is the greatest cherry blossom manor in Spring Island. You can't do that. A thin old man fell to the ground and watched a group of pirates with wicked faces in the manor. Grinding his teeth, he struggles to open his mouth. Bang! One foot stepped on the old man's chest and restored him to the ground. The owner of the foot was a fierce wicked pirate with sharp teeth. He looked down at the old man under his feet and smiled fiercely at him. "I heard, you don't welcome pirate here?" The old man was trampled on and could not answer. That pirate snorted and said, "What a joke, do you know what time is it? It is the great age of pirates, beauty and peace have been ended more than a decade ago. Since it is the greatest manor, you must have a lot of treasures here. If you don't want to die, hand them over." Another pirate, carrying a portable cannon, came to the side and grinned. The old man breathed hard and said, "This is the most precious treasure here, these cherry trees." "Ah, what precious treasure is the cherry tree?" The two pirates looked at each other and couldn't help but ask again. At the time, there were dozens of pirates wandering in the manor, and some people rushed into the villa in the middle of the manor. There was a burst of porcelain cracking in the villa. Quickly a few people came out of it and scolded, "Nothing, not even a gold coin. Where is the treasure?" After many pirates raged in the Sakura manor, they all got nothing and quickly gathered under a cherry tree at the entrance to the manor. After many pirates rampaged around the cherry blossom manor, they got nothing and soon gathered under a cherry tree at the entrance of the manor. Captain Bartra looked at the old man guarding the manor with a fierce face and lifted him up by the neck, saying, "Damn, where did you hide all your treasures? There is nothing you want here." The old man spoke in a difficult tone and said, "Like I said, these are the most precious things here, cherry trees that have grown for hundreds of years." Bang! Bartra had a look of anger on his face. He specifically asked about the most famous place on the island. The answer he received led him to this cherry blossom manor. After running here, there is nothing. There are only cherry trees in the manor? I see, you don't want to live. His eyes became extremely indifferent. He threw the old man to the ground. His arms suddenly turned into a silver fluid. In a moment, it solidified into a sword, which reached the old man's neck. The old man breathed hard, but there was no fear in his eyes. He just lay there dying and had no intention of resisting the long sword against his neck. Bartra stared at the old man for several seconds and suddenly grinned. "Very good. Is this cherry tree the most precious thing here? Then I will take away your most precious thing." The moment his voice fell, he looked at the men around him and said, "Burn it, burn all the trees, don't leave one." The old man, who had been waiting to die, heard this sentence and his eyes opened. He struggled violently to get up and grabbed the sword that Bartra's arm had turned into. He said, You can't do that, the manor is noisy." Instead of stabbing the old man with a sword, Bartra kicked him away and let him fall into the distance powerlessly. The old man watched as Bartra's men began to destroy cherry trees in the manor. Bang! A cherry tree was ignited by the cannonball and burned rapidly. The pink cherry petals turned golden red in the fire, like a sunset that would fade away. The old man struggled to get up to stop it, but his aging body was tortuous, and it was difficult to stand up, so he could only watch the scene with open eyes. "Wicked devil, you are a wicked demon," and just as the old man was about to collapse, a voice suddenly came from a distance. "It's a beautiful view." Ross and Lafitte came in from outside the manor. His eyes showed a touch of appreciation. After sweeping the whole cherry manor, they fell on the burning cherry tree. When Ross and Lafitte came in, Bartra and many other pirates saw them and they recognized them. For the first half of Grand Line Supernova, who had a bounty of over 100 million, he knew something about Ross and soon recognized Ross. "You are Ghost Hand Ross and Demon Sheriff." After recognizing Ross's identity, Bartra and others suddenly became serious. In the first half of today's Grand Line, Ross is the #1 supernova. No one thought that they would meet Ross here. Ross's eyes stayed on the burning cherry tree for a few seconds, then he looked at Bartra and others and said, "It seems a little too luxurious for your funeral." When Bartra heard Ross, his face instantly became gloomy. He knows about the somethings about the Ghost Hand pirates. They destroy other pirates and they are not afraid of Marines. The only reason Ross would have come here is for his head. "Are you looking for me? It is not easy to take the head of a pirate who has 160 million berries bounty on his head." Ross smiled faintly. Whiz! Ross, standing there, suddenly disappeared. When he appeared again, he had come to Bartra, and his palms fluttered lightly against Bartra's chest. The power of distortion suddenly broke out. Bang! Bartra's chest was instantly muddy as the spinning distortion power distorted his whole body, but strangely he did not bleed. His entire body turned into a pale silver liquid. After flowing for a period of time, the liquid quickly rose and converged and became human again. Captain is unscathed. Seeing this scene, many pirates who had been shocked by Ross's speed were relieved and grinned a little. So far, only one of the enemies they have encountered can hurt Bartra, but he was defeated in the end by Bartra. Although Ross's bounty is as high as 300 million berries, they still have absolute confidence in the terrifying ability of their captain. "What? Your fame is so great and you are only at this level." Spiral Blade. Bartra smiled wickedly and flies out with a sudden wave of his arms and liquefies in midair, turning into two swirling blades that tangent to Ross's body. Ding! Ross raises his hand and sweeps out the two swords. He looks at Bartra with narrowed eyes and said, "Paramecia metal attribute fruit? It's an interesting ability." In the intelligence of Kaku and others delivered, there is naturally Bartra's specific ability, but Ross did not care and only listened to Bartra having a metal attribute fruit. It now appears that this fruit is like the high-level version of the Mochi Mochi fruit, which resembles the fruit of Bigmom Pirates category. It has the ability to turn into a liquid state, somewhat closer to the shape of Logia. This is a very good ability. If it is trained properly, it will become very powerful and may surpass Logia Devil Fruit. When he heard Ross, Bartra snorted and grabbed the hook blade arm that flew back to him and smirked at Ross, saying, "Interesting. You will see it soon, despair." Buzz. His fist fluidized abruptly into an extremely sharp long gun, and with one of his fists, it thrust violently into Ross's chest. Faced with Bartra's blow, Ross closed his fingers and fluttered his fist lightly. Bang! The fist and the long gun collided together. Bartra's imagination of the long gun running through Ross's fist did not appear. Instead, the long guns began to crumble from the gun's head and broke down all the way, restoring the shape of the arm. Then, under the ravages of the power of distortion, his arm burst open and blood and broken bones splashed around as he flew backward. Ah! Bartra looked at his broken right arm and gave a scream. The atmosphere suddenly became extremely stiff. The expressions of those smirking pirates are all fixed on their faces. In the next moment, they were horrified. "Captain's arm. How is it possible? Hey, Captain, are you kidding here? Captain, quickly recover that arm." Several pirates reached out to Bartra, screaming and rolling, and tried to walk, but they were all stiff and unable to take a step. In the field, Ross's eyes flashed with disappointment as he walked towards Bartra. "At this level, it's a pity that this fruit falls into your hands." "No, this is impossible." Looking at the Ross coming over, Bartra's eyes showed sorrow and fear. Ross's fist can actually break his metal form, which is harder than steel, and completely destroying one of his arms. How on earth did he do that? "A frog at the bottom of the well." Ross said the last word in a tone of indifference, lifting his foot and stepping down. Bartra's whole body melted into silver metal liquid, but it was still useless. It burst with blood and broken bones when Ross stepped on it. Moving weapon Bartra with a bounty of 160 million berries has been killed, and the reward is 40 talent proficiency points. Haha, I'm afraid they don't even know what hockey is. They stood no chance. Not far away, Lafitte watched the scene, grinned and walked towards the remaining pirate. The rest of the pirates saw that their captain has been killed by Ross, and they were terrified of Ross and Lafitte, and they turned and fled. Sneer. Sneer. Lafitte's figure flashed in the field, killing 7 or 8 pirates in an instant. The remaining pirates scattered to try to escape, but Ross lifted his foot and stepped lightly. The ground rolled and surged, instantly turning into a huge ball of earth and stone, wrapping all the others in it, crushing and erasing them. Crash! After killing all the pirates, Ross raised his hand, rolled over the soil, and threw all the bodies and blood out of the manor. At the same time, it poured into the burning cherry tree, which prevented the fire from spreading. Cough, cough. The old man of the manor looked at the scene. His dry eyes became wet. He coughed hard twice and barely stood up. He also recognized Ross and knew that Ross was a pirate, but Ross killed Bartra and others and prevented the fire from spreading. Whatever Ross was the benefactor who saved the centuries-old Cherry Blossom Manor. "Thank you, you're welcome." Ross looked at the burning cherry tree and asked casually, "Are you the only one here?" "Yes, I'm the only one left." The old man nodded and sighed softly. Reaching out and gently picking up a falling cherry tree leaves, Ross shook his head and turned to walk out of the manor, and Lafitte quickly followed. Looking at Ross leaving, the old man took a long breath and reset back to the ground. Although a tree was destroyed, he managed to keep the manor. Ghost Hand Ross, he is totally different from the image of the government report. On the contrary, it is similar to the gossip circulated in the previous period. Thinking of this, the old man shook his head with a bitter smile and sighed. What is Marine and the government trying to do with the world? After destroying Bartra, the main purpose of the trip has been completed, but they needed to stay here for 10 days to store the magnetic waves in log pose. Ross temporarily dispersed with Lafitte and others. The scenery on this island is rare and even Lafitte has some interest in cherry blossoms. It seems that there are some fantastic ideas in his head. 5 days later. Walking along the cherry blossom street, admiring the scenery and the occasional beautiful girl, the Den Den Mushi in Ross's pocket suddenly rang. After connecting Den Den Mushi, Lafitte's dignified voice came from it. "Captain, we seem to be in trouble. There are 5 ships on the west bank, no, 6 marine battleships, large battleships from headquarters, and they seem to have been ashore for a long time. 6 large battleships, and from marine headquarters. Such a force configuration is not comparable to that of marine of any branch. They appeared on this island and their goal is undoubtedly the Ghost Hand pirates. Has they finally arrived, marines from headquarters?" Hearing Lafitte's words, Ross paused and murmured in a low voice, with a flicker in his eyes. Even with Kaku and others as peripheral intelligence networks, even with the speed of the Ghost Shadow ship, it is impossible to avoid the marine and the government that has eyes on almost every island. "Shall I inquire about the details?" Lafitte whispered at the other end of Den Den Mushi. "No," Ross shook his head and looked deep into the end of the street. "They're here, this time, our intelligence is a step behind. I hope we won't meet Marine Admiral." Ross is in a 3-way intersection and the entire street has become empty without him knowing. Only the cherry blossoms are scattered silently. Tread. 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 No one spoke. The 3 directions were almost simultaneous, filled with dense footsteps. The footsteps came from far and near, clattering together like the last sign before the tsunami, depressed and suppressed. After a few seconds, in the street just ahead of Ross, there appeared a marine general in marine's justice cloak, embroidered with vice admiral's epaulettes and shaved with a dark purple Mosacan head. Almost at the same time, in the street behind Ross, a general marine, wearing a brown jacket and a marine justice cloak, came with a cigar in his mouth and he was wearing a necktie. Marine Headquarters Vice Admiral, Manga, Cancer. Ross stared indifferently, looking at the marines gathered in silence, and spoke into the Den Den Mushi in his hand. "Lafitte, you and Robin go to the Ghost Shadow ship and don't let any marine break my ship." After saying this, he hangs the Den Den Mushi and puts Den Den Mushi in his pocket. After a few seconds, from the last direction, marines came from both sides and a scarred marine general stepped out of it, forming a triangle with Manga and Cancer, and pinched Ross in the middle. 3 Marine Headquarters Vice Admiral gathered on the Cherry Blossom Street. No one spoke, but the atmosphere of the street had become extremely oppressive and it was almost suffocating. In a state of repression, Doberman, who finally appeared, broke the oppressive and solidified atmosphere. He pressed his right hand on his blade and pulled the blade out of the scabbard slowly. "At last we met. Ghost Hands, Ross, at the same time." The news of Marine's 6 headquarters battleship appearing in Springs Island also spread rapidly to all over the world, attracting numerous Foss's attention. 3 headquarters Vice Admiral, 6 large battleship, Marine deployed such terrifying forces, what do they want to do? Very soon, these forces began to acquire intelligence from various sources, and ultimately the intelligence was: the Ghost Hand pirates appeared on the Spring Island a few days ago. It turned out that this was to exterminate the Ghost Hand pirates. 6 large battleships from the headquarters and 3 vice admirals, Marines, are serious this time. The atmosphere of the major forces who have heard the news is solemn. No matter how rough the sea is, the government and Marine must not be completely angered. This is the iron rule: once offended, Marine and the government will come after you with full force, and unless you were one of the 4 emperors, there was no way out of the ocean. The most terrifying force on the sea, the government, and Marine who dominated the world, finally showed its magnificence after being repeatedly shaken by the Ghost Hand pirates. I didn't expect a pirate hunter from West Blue to be able to toss it to the present level, but it will all end here. Doberman's eyes had no mood swings. Ross was his fault, and now he's going to erase it with his own hands. Marines standing behind Doberman did not know the truth of what had happened. They were just looking at something different. They didn't expect Ross to bring 3 high-ranking headquarters vice admiral together against him. Unlike the branch vice admiral, headquarters vice admiral is the real backbone of Marines, which largely represents the limits of ordinary people. As for admiral and fleet admiral, they're on another level. Looking at the whole Marine headquarters, apart from the retired and semi-retired ones, there are only a dozen or 20 people actually in office, far from the average vice admiral branch. 3 headquarters vice admiral. This is second only to the troop configuration of the legendary Buster Call. For Ross, a 300 million bounty pirate, 3 headquarters vice admiral terrifying lineups were mobilized, which is enough to see how much Marine's top management attaches to the ghost hand pirates, and obviously they do not intend to give them any more opportunities. Ching! Manga pulled out the blade and stared at Ross. Cancer also pressed one hand on the hilt of his sword and his eyes were cold. The whole street became silent and the Marines from the headquarters were holding their breaths seeing this scene. Nervous. Depression. In this silent, repressed, volcanic field that was about to erupt, Ross stared at Doberman and said slowly. It was you. In the beginning, he only wanted to be an ordinary pirate hunter. He didn't need any orders from his superiors to hunt and kill pirate at will to improve his strength and gradually become stronger and go to the top. But because of Marine's pride and Marine's so-called face, the easy road with almost no crisis was completely cut off and there was no room for it. Indeed, from Marine's point of view, it seems that face and prestige are really important, far more important than a common pirate hunter in West Blue. But that pirate hunter is him. Give your life for the so-called justice, don't kid. He is not a saint. Ross never cheats his heart. Between kindness and evil, he chooses neutrality. Between chaos and orderliness, he chooses chaos. He is very calm about his position. He never regards himself as so-called kindness and justice, nor does he take pleasure in killing and brutality. After judging Doberman's identity, Ross laughed instead. There was not a trace of anger in that smile, but only a slight irony. I didn't expect it. A West Blue pirate hunter that was ordered to be killed in a Marine base killed a rear admiral of the West Blue branch, then killed a headquarters rear admiral of West Blue and then killed a vice admiral on the Grand Line. It's all very unexpected. Manga and Cancer's face sank. As for Doberman, the finger holding the hilt showed a slight tremor. Even as a headquarters vice admiral, who had gone through numerous bloody battles, this is a moment when it was somewhat difficult for him to control his emotions. Ross's tone is very dull, but because of this dullness, this sentence pierced into their heart like a sharp weapon and made Doberman's face extremely depressed. This is the last topic he wants to face. Do you remember what I said in the beginning? Ross stood there, facing the 3 headquarters vice admiral, surrounded by a large number of Marine elites without any expression of fear and panic, and spoke in a calm voice. Doberman's fingers holding the hilt of his sword continued to exert force on the hilt of the steel casting and the cigar in the mouth was almost bitten. Enough. Everything will end here. Doberman roared and the broken half of the cigar silently fell to the ground. At the same time, his body turned into a shadow and he was holding his sword with both hands with armament hockey coating its edges. He attacked Ross with his sword. It is impossible to shake his heart with words. He is a Marine headquarters vice admiral. He has arrested and executed many pirates in his life. The peace of the sea has merit that belongs to him and will never be erased. In any case, from the time Ross cruelly killed Marine, his sins will never be washed away. Destroying the ghost hand pirates will be absolute justice. Buzz. Ross's eyes were calm and indifferent to Doberman's sword. He raised his hand as the armament hockey surged and converged, instantly forming a black hardening and stimulating the power of distortion. He caught Doberman's sword in midair with his bare hands. No, you're just saying the opposite. It's not the end, it's just the beginning. As for the hypocritical justice. Ross's eyes were calm as his fingers were pinching Doberman's sword slightly and the power of distortion erupted all the way up. Even though Doberman tried his best to stimulate armament hockey and harden the blade with black armament hockey, under Ross's power of distortion, the whole blade began to tremble, and its arms and fingers continued to tremble. Whiz! Just then, Manga, who was behind Ross, made his move. His speed was very fast and almost instantly he came behind Ross. The blade in his hand burst into a green sword energy spiral, which ran through Ross's back. Sword flow, stab. Looking at Manga's support, Doberman was sure to hold the sword handle with cool eyes and press the blade to Ross's palm without giving Ross a chance to escape. Ross snorted as he held Doberman's sword in his right hand and pushed his left hand in the opposite direction and grasped Manga's blade, shattering the sword energy around Manga's blade in an instant. ZZ. Manga's face changed slightly, but he didn't step back. Instead, he concentrated armament hockey completely on his palm and blade, forming a left-right collision with Doberman. Ross would have suffered Doberman's chopping if he fought against his sword, and his sword if he fought against Doberman's chopping. Marine's existence bears the name of absolute justice. The last headquarters vice admiral Cancer, holding a sword that had not yet been pulled out of the scabbard, slowly approached Ross with an indifferent and stern eye. For the people who are afraid of wicked forces, our existence is of great significance. If you do not have justice in your heart, don't criticize Marine's justice, boy. Ching. The moment the voice fell, he plucked his sword out of its sheath and cut it at Ross. All three headquarters vice admiral are top-notch swordsmen. Although their tactics and kendo are slightly different, they are very close in strength. This sword has no fancy sword energy, and all its power is concentrated on the blade, which is easy enough to cut off steel. Back off. Looking at the three headquarters vice admiral, the rest of the marine elites did not come forward, but under the command of their captains, quickly retreated, all the way back to dozens of meters away, completely encircling the area. There's no point in rushing to such a battlefield, and there are three headquarters vice admiral here. Ross will be defeated here. Well said. There is really no justice in my heart. Watching Cancer slashing with his sword, Ross, who was suppressed by Doberman and Manga in the middle, did not panic but replied in a gentle tone while both hands violently forced. Buzz. Power of distortions burst into full swing and pounded on both sides of him. Manga and Doberman felt a strange force pounding madly on their armament hockey's defense. Both of them shook their arms and involuntarily retreated. After a move that made two vice admiral retreat, Ross retracted his right hand and converged his 5 fingers into a fist that was surrounded by the power of distortion. With a vague sense of fury, he rushed towards Cancer's sword. But, to put your marine justice on my head, I can only say, you picked the wrong person. Bang! Ross's fist and the Cancer's sword collided in the air, making a loud sound that instantly tore the earth between them. Under Ross's power of distortion, Cancer's face changed. The outbreak of chopping was crushed by Ross's power of distortion as he staggered back by Ross's punch. The power of this guy has reached this level. No wonder Ross could kill Crocodile, Dalmatian and CP9 sent by the government. In the first half of the Grand Line, Ross is indeed a very dangerous existence with such strength. Fortunately, they're here to block him. Otherwise, if he continues to develop, he would have become a terrifying existence in the future. Moon Arc cut. After Manga was repulsed, he was first to stabilize his body and attacked Ross. At the same time, Doberman also attacked Ross with his sword. This is not a duel, nor a contest for sword arts, but he is here to carry out the name of justice and crush the wicked criminals. Whatever the process, as long as they can win, it doesn't matter. Three headquarters vice admiral launched a siege, and occasionally the sword energy aftermath cut the streets by dozens of meters in an instant and cut off many cherry trees on both sides, and countless cherry blossoms scattered all over the sky. Whiz. Mamanga's body turned into a shadow as he appeared behind Ross in an instant. Shallow green sword energy emerged from the blade of his hand. He drew an arc in the air and cut it towards Ross. Ross flew up and avoided Mamanga's sword. Meanwhile, his right 5 fingers converged into a fist as he punched Doberman, making him skid backward by 5 or 6 steps as he left several deep footprints in the street. Sneer. Cancer swings his sword and it chops out with sword energy. This sword energy is filled with bloodlust as it strikes towards the lower body of Ross in midair. Ross holds up his hand and holds the bloody sword energy in his hand. He rubs his hands together and turns them into a red spiral sword ball. He pushes it towards Mamanga's back. Ching. Mamanga's sword was severely chopped on the blood-colored sword ball, making a loud sound that splashed with sparks. He cut the blood-colored sword ball hard, but in the explosion of Ross's power of distortions, he flew backward in an instant. Caresses cuts. Funeral song of blood. Doberman and Cancer joined hands and they jointly switched their swords and cut them out, intersecting in the air, forming a crossed oblique sword energy, sweeping across. Ross's face remained unchanged, and when he stepped on the intersection of the cross sword energy, the power of distortion exploded violently, turning the distortion of the cross sword energy pedal into a spiral, and it falls apart in midair. Gravity fist. He lifted his foot and slammed into the air, and he swooped down as he charged into Manga, who flew out and his right hand clenched into a fist, and the ability of gravity distortion suddenly broke out. Manga could not handle it with a sword. In a hurry, he could only raise his sword upwards. Armament hockey has completely surrounded the sword as he tried to block Ross's fist. Bang! Ross's fist fell and a heavy pressure different from the previous destructive power suddenly erupted that made Mamanga's body sink in the ground as if it was subjected to great pressure. His legs were instantly embedded in the ground. When Doberman and Cancer saw it, they rushed towards him. They attacked Ross's body with their 2 swords. Whiz. Ross turned over in midair and turned his right hand into his palm and grabbed Momonga's sword blade. He moved his mind and the direction of gravity was changed drastically, from downward to upward in an instant. Momanga was resisting the heavy pressure, but suddenly his body felt light and the pressure lifted. The sword in his hand was grabbed by Ross and he suddenly has a bad feeling in his heart. In a hurry, he adjusted his body and without retreating he slammed towards Ross with the direction of the gravity distortion. Ross, expressionless, grabbed the right hand of the sword blade and shook it to the left. He threw Momonga's sword towards Cancer and raised his foot to Doberman's sword blade. The three headquarters vice admiral are almost equal in strength because they are not competent and slightly weaker than Lucci in leopard form in physique. The strength of Haki and the subtlety of sword arts are far higher than Lucci. And, as the swordsman's attack is more concise than the pure body, the three headquarters vice admiral's chopping is stronger than Lucci's in the pure attack. Among the three people, Doberman and Momanga and Cancer, there is no small difference in strength compared with Ross. Even if two of them join hands, they will be easily suppressed and killed by Ross, but the three of them join hands. It almost compensates for most of their defects and they are extremely flexible and adaptable. Ross's attack can knock out one person and the power of distortion can break through the defense of armament Haki and left the arm numb and useless for some time, but two of them can cooperate with each other and Ross can't crush both of them at the same time. Sword Flow, Final Variant, Blood Moon Cut, Death Morning Sword. Doberman, Momanga, and Cancer, after being shocked back by Ross, stood on the front line. Three men made their sword attack at the same time. The three swords were interlaced in the air and interlaced into a web of sword energy, which covered Ross violently and blocked him in all directions. Ross's eyes surged, he lifted his foot and used Geppo, Moonwalk, and he did not retreat but slammed against the sword energy net with his 5 fingers clenched and the power of distortion raised to its limit. Buzz. Ross's punch directly hit the core of the sword energy network. The power of distortions broke out wantonly, which could contain the whole sword energy network. After a slight standstill, the violent power of distortion broke the sword energy network. The broken sword energy splashed everywhere, splitting the branches and petals of cherry trees, and deep ravines appeared on the ground. After the net of sword energy broke, Ross was forced back by 2 steps. After all, the power of sword energy is a little weaker than that of the sword power attached to armament Haki. Even if the three people jointly launched the sword energy network, Ross can still break it, but it is still quite powerful. Good cooperation. After breaking the net of sword energy, Ross regained some of his strength and he had almost figured out the strength of the three vice admiral. If he had faced the three headquarters vice admiral before improving his speed, it would have been extremely difficult, or even almost impossible, to win. But, now that he's faster than the three, his observation Haki can clearly capture the movements of the three, plus the power of distortion full-blown attack is also 5 or 6% stronger than any of their attacks. 1-on-1 is a full-scale suppression and 1-on-2 is also doable. As for 1-on-3, then he has to fight to see the results. Get your hands on it. Cancer looked at Ross indifferently. In fact, Ross's strength shocked him a little. He could even make a left-handed and right-handed dash under the siege of the three of them. If only 2 people came this time, not to say whether they could defeat Ross, they wouldn't even be able to retreat with their lives. When Aokiji made the 3 of them join hands, he still felt that they paid too much attention to it. Now, it seems that this decision is undoubtedly correct. You don't have any chance. Don't struggle. Momanga is also looking at Ross, trying to influence Ross with words. As long as Ross can show a little flaw, then the battle will almost be over, otherwise it will play like this. Even if they win in the end, it will not be easy. Doberman did not speak, but his fierce eyes also expressed his inner feelings without concealment, and he would never give Ross any chance. The real fight will start now. Ross looked blankly at the 3 headquarters vice admiral who surrounded him in the center. Now that he had almost judged the strength of the 3 vice admiral, the real battle should start. Bang! At the next moment, Ross lifted his foot and the power of distortion poured into the earth. The street with a radius of 100 meters suddenly swayed and instantly made everyone stand on shaky ground. Numerous Marines who surrounded the area dozens of meters away could hardly hold their own. They were in a state of confusion and staggered backward in horror. Ross ignored the other miscellaneous fish. The power of distortion spread from the earth and concentrated on the Momanga trio. The 3 men swayed and their bodies flew out. Whiz! At very fast speed, a shadow passed through the void. Ross appeared in front of Doberman, clenched his fists and punched out with a violent blow. Doberman spurred armament hockey, lifted his foot and barely held his body while holding the sword in both hands, using his sword arts with a dignified face. His sword slammed into Ross's fist. Although his heart is full of killing intent, he will not be dazzled by this. Ross's strength is reflected in this short-term confrontation. He alone is not a match for him. Bang! Ross's fist fell and Doberman's blade was instantly contained in the position of the boxing bone. The entire body of the sword buzzed and trembled. Even if it was attached to the dark armament hockey, it still suffered a lot of pressure. The air on both sides of the sword front filled with a vague form of distortion. After a stalemate for half a second, the ground under Doberman's feet collapsed. His legs were directly embedded in the mud. His forehead turned green as he fought with all his might. Iron-cutting sword. Manga, holding a sword in his hand, rushed towards Ross at the first moment after he had stabilized his figure. He flew through the air with the blade in his hand which seemed to cut through the void. Ding! The power of distortion spread through Ross's left hand. He touches Mamanga's sword with his hand which produced a loud sound. The blade wrapped with the fierce momentum is stiffly contained in midair by Ross. The blade constantly buzzed and trembled but it was unable to go any further. After blocking Mamanga's sword, Ross suppressed Doberman's fist and violently forced Doberman's half-hard body into the mud, while jumping back to avoid the sword that Cancer had hit from the other side. Bang! After his legs fell to the ground, Ross sank low and gravity distortion was displayed violently. The whole earth was instantly centered on him, forming a terrifying motion like a wave. At this time, those marine elites who had retreated hundreds of meters away were still affected by the aftermath of this force. They were unstable for a while, looking at the large pieces of soil and sand that were constantly breaking up and pulling up from the ground, all showing a certain degree of horror. The earth is cracking. No, it's flying. This is the power of Ghost Hand Ross. It's terrifying. Even though they are all the elites of headquarters, they are still shocked by the strength of this level. At least in the face of such strength, they have little to no resistance. No, vice admirals are in the range of this attack. Back off. Don't mess up. Keep the formation, prepare the cannons and sea stone and don't let that pirate escape. Vice admirals can't lose to a pirate. There was Captain of Marine Headquarters shouting loudly and under his command, some of the chaotic marine regained order and retreated further away. In the field, a huge block of soil with a radius of 10 meters or even tens of meters rises from the ground. The cherry trees on it rustle and countless cherry blossoms are scattered in this area. After this huge piece of soil flew up, it began to run across the area, flying randomly with each other. Two pieces of mudstone 10 meters in diameter collided together, instantly issued a landslide. Countless mudstones wrapped in cherry blossoms were bursting everywhere. Sneer. 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 Mamanga's face was repressed as he swung his swords and smashed the huge stones that hit him, but at this moment, Ross's figure suddenly appeared in front of him with his fist swinging towards him. Bang! Manga raised his sword to resist the attack, but he could not resist the power of Ross. In the air, he was thrown out by Ross's punch and his back slammed into a mud stone with a diameter of 10 meters. The mud was instantly tumbling, as if it were alive and swallowed Mamanga's body and made a chewing sound, trying to crush him directly. Gotcha! Gotcha! The next moment, there were cracks on the mud stone. The crack overflowed with a blue light that spread to the whole rock and eventually completely broke up, revealing Mamanga's awkward figure. The ability of this guy, he can even manipulate gravity, be careful. He wiped a handful of sand from his face and shouted vigilantly. By this time, Doberman had already been in big trouble. He had been punched by Ross and half of his leg was embedded in the soil. When Ross was able to mobilize, he was the first to be swallowed by the cracked soil. Despite the armor of armament hockey which was not damaged by the power of distortions contained in the soil, Ross's blow came to his head when the mud that sealed him was broken. Bang! In a hurry, Doberman could only fight with a sword. He was hit by Ross's punch and fell from the sky and hit the already destroyed ground and created one more crater on it. Don't be too crazy. Cancer watched as Ross charged towards Doberman who was on the ground and shouted angrily as he came from one side to support him and swung his sword at Ross. Ross kicked him back a few steps. Manga rushed down from above using Geppo, moonwalk, and slammed into Ross's back. Ching! Ross avoided the attack and his figure created an arc as he charged into the ground below. The power of distortion dispersed from the ground. The soil gradually lost control and began to crumble and fall to the ground. Meanwhile, Ross's power of distortion was once again poured into the ground. Bang rumble. Doberman, who was trying to struggle out of the earth, was wrapped in huge pieces of soil that were tens of meters long and flew up into the sky, colliding with the falling debris. Bang! 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 Like the sound of heavy artillery, the sound of continuous explosion echoed in the air as the soil splashed everywhere. The cherry blossoms and dust filled the sky. Manga and Cancer's face were somewhat ugly as both of them charged towards Ross. Ross turned around and punched his left hand and his right hand at the same time, slamming into a Manga and Cancer that had attacked him from left and right. Bang! At the same time, resisting a hard blow from the two men, Ross staggered and flew out toward the rear. He retreated more than 10 meters in a row before he could stop. There was also a slight bloodstain on both fists, but it was not serious, just skin injury. Crash! The huge rocks in the sky finally broke up and fell down again, forcing Manga and Cancer to retreat toward both sides. Among the huge stones, white sword energy overflowed from one of them before it was torn apart. Doberman's figure shook out of it. The cloak of justice was already fragmented and blood spilled from the corners of his mouth. Damn you! He gritted his teeth and looked at Ross. 5 fingers clasped the handle of his sword as he rushed towards Ross. Manga and Cancer looked at each other and charged toward Ross from left and right. They joined hands with Doberman again. The power of distortion in Ross was boiling and he was recovering. He hummed softly as his figure turned into a shadow. He retreated backward and the bloodstains on his fists healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. Physical enhancement, it not only strengthens the body but also gives a partial self-healing ability. Naturally, in the general department, there is also the talent of resilience for self-healing ability, but Ross did not activate it in order to save free talent points. After successively avoiding the attacks of Manga and others and tearing apart the sword energy released by the 3 people, Ross calmed down and took a deep breath before rushing up against the 3 vice admirals. The power of distortion is released again and spreads in all directions. This time it is not gravity distortion, but light distortion and the distortion sound developed by Ross himself. Insect dark stream. Buzz. Suddenly, with Ross as the center, the 50-meter radius area was suddenly covered by the dark sky and the light completely disappeared. Manga and Doberman lost sight directly and there was a continuous buzz in their ears. Only the sound remained as if countless crickets were squeaking in their ears. What is that? The whole area has become dark and I can't hear any other sound than insect chirping. The Marines, who retreated farther away, looked at the dark curtain with a radius of nearly 50 meters that suddenly appeared on the scene. They were shocked and didn't know what was going on. In the dark cage, which was 50 meters in radius, Manga and other vice admirals were stunned and surprised. I can't see anything and I can't hear anything. The 3 of them had a headache about Ross's ability to make so many troublesome changes, and at the same time, they immediately calmed down and used their observation hockey to capture Ross's actions. Losing sight and hearing completely, observation hockey can capture Ross's movements, but it is a little troublesome. Plus they are 3 people. So observation hockey not only needs to capture Ross's actions, but they also need to capture their peers' actions. Otherwise, there will be no cooperation. But, even so, it is still very difficult for Ross to form a perfect match with the previous one. Under the shadow of the dark cage, Ross is like a fish in the water, constantly running around, while attacking the 3 people recklessly. It seems that 3 people work together against Ross, but it seems that they are surrounded by Ross. Bang! Bang! In the absence of timely support from Manga and Doberman, Cancer took 2 of Ross's punches in a row. His arms were numb and he had to retreat to the rear, standing between Manga and Doberman. After shaking off Cancer, Ross opened his eyes in the darkness. Suddenly, he grasped the handle of Happy Spring at his waist, drew it out of its sheath and swung it out. Watch out! Manga keenly captured Ross's movements and immediately sipped a low voice, but his voice was completely covered by the constant buzzing sounds and could not be transmitted to Doberman at all. Fortunately, both Doberman and Cancer have observation hockey by which they were able to capture Ross's movements, but Ross's attack still gave them instant headaches. Observation hockey is also graded. The vast majority of people can only capture the enemy's movements by utilizing observation hockey and can't really replace their visual and hearing senses through it unless they can achieve the foresight ability of observation hockey, and the 3 vice admirals has not reached that level. Moreover, their abilities are not exactly the same. Manga observation hockey and armament hockey are both more proficient, while Doberman is better at armament hockey and Cancer is better at observation hockey. Such a difference makes them unable to form effective cooperation in this situation where they have lost their senses of seeing and hearing. Even their actions have been delayed, fearing that their attacks will be exploited by Ross and injuring their peers instead. Ching! Ching! In the midst of chaos, who knows whose sword is fighting whose sword? There is absolutely no sound or vision. The only thing the three can rely on is observation hockey. Ross is not very knowledgeable about sword arts, nor does he rely on the sword. He pulls out the sword just to create more chaos and create more trouble for Manga. Damn it. No sound, no vision, and constant buzzing in their ears. In the confusion, Manga was almost hit by Doberman's sword energy. Although he barely escaped, he was caught by Ross after avoiding Doberman's attack, who punched him, causing him to fly backward and almost made him lose his sword. We can't go on like this, we have to form some sort of defense against him. Cancer was a little anxious, but in such a situation, he could not hear Doberman and Manga and was in a state of complete inability to communicate. It is difficult for them to form a back-to-back defense. They can only be swayed by Ross in the chaos, and he was constantly diverging and finding flaws in their attacks. For a time, they were suppressed by Ross. This ability should not directly affect our eyes and ears. Something is wrong. Manga forced himself to settle and a thought flashed in his mind. As he gritted his teeth, he quickly retreated toward the rear. He soon felt that his eyes could see and the buzz in his ear disappeared as he left the dark cage. Sure enough, this ability only works within a certain range. Manga's eyes flashed a ray of light. Whiz, whiz. After noticing that Manga had retreated far away, Doberman and Cancer both came to their senses and moved further away. The three men retreated from the dark cage one after another, but they soon found that retreating from that dark area had no effect when Ross is coming towards them. The dark cage is centered on Ross's position, and even if they are out of the cage, the dark cage will still move with Ross and will change its position. If they want to fight Ross, they have to go in the dark cage. And Ross is faster than them. Even if three of them retreat in three different directions, Ross only needs to chase one and attack him, which will create even more flaws. Sure enough, we still have to form some defense against him inside that cage. Doberman and Manga all know how to fight in the constant confrontation, but Ross did not sit by and watch them form that kind of corner defense situation but continues to rush left and right, destroying the alliance of the three. Bang! 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 Various sounds echoed from the dark cage and the Marines were shocked seeing sword energies coming from the battlefield from time to time and leaving cracks on the ground. No one knows how long it took, but the dark cage gradually dissipated, revealing four figures. Doberman, Manga, and Cancer are standing in a corner. They are still in constant confusion and confrontation. They are standing defensively against Ross. That's why Ross no longer spends stamina to maintain the dark cage and let it dissipate. Both the Vice Admiral trio and Ross are breathing heavily. At the moment, Ross's shirt was tattered and there was a wound of about 10 centimeters long on his left shoulder. Blood stained his shirt and blood dripping on his fist, but most of the wounds are skin wound and there were no deep wounds. Compared to Ross, the three Vice Admirals are in a difficult position. Manga looked at Ross with a sullen look. His left hand was hanging beside him. His entire arm was constantly shaking and it seemed that he could not use it in a short time. "How are you?" he asked Cancer. Cancer looked at his bloody right arm and shook his head as bones pierced through the flesh and blood. "My right arm is out of use for the time being and I can't use my full-powered sword arts." Cough. Cough. Doberman coughed violently. Blood spilled from one side of his mouth and his clothes were covered with blood and stones. None of them expected that their fight with Ross will lead to such a situation. Although Ross was injured, it was much lighter than them. "He is powerful." Doberman gritted his teeth and showed anger in his eyes. In the strange dark cage just now, every move is extremely grievous and they were passively beaten and they could only defend themselves from Ross's attacks. Ross is an excellent experienced fighter, as it is clear that even with their numbers advantage, they have lost the power to attack actively. His stamina will empty soon. He can't keep using these attacks without some sort of pressure on his body. Manga looked at Ross calmly and said, "He's devil fruit user. It's bound to take a lot of stamina to maintain that thing. Don't give him a chance to breathe." Cancer took a deep breath and nodded while looking coldly at Ross. His left hand holding the sword suddenly tightened and he attacked Ross with his sword energy. Whiz! Whiz! At the same time, Manga and Doberman shouted loudly and rushed up from left and right. As headquarters vice admiral who had experienced countless fights, their battle instincts are good. Although their injuries are serious now, Ross' stamina's consumption must be more serious. If they were replaced by ordinary pirates, the pirates would have to give up on their dreams and live the rest of their lives as crippled because they could only rely on themselves. But for Marines the situation is different, with the government and headquarters as a strong backup. As long as they could win, everything would be all right. Sure enough. Faced with the pursuit of the three, Ross no longer exerted the ability of the dark cage but used the ability of gravity distortion to avoid the three people's frontal attack. Single sword flow, water-cutting blade. Manga's eyes flashed and he suddenly gave a low cry. His trembling left hand barely reached over and grabbed the handle with his right hand. A blue light flashed over the blade, converged at the tip of the blade and swept out at Ross. This sword directly split out a huge sword energy of about tens of meters and it was very solid. It broke through the air and flew directly to Ross in midair. Rankyaku, Tempest Kick. Cancer gave a low cry and jumped, kicking 4 or 5 chops to block Ross's escape, while the sword in his left hand slammed into Ross's chest. Ross was expressionless as he put his hand on Manga's huge sword energy. The sword energy displayed some elastic characteristics as it slanting from the side of Ross. Then, Ross punched and broke Cancer's 4 or 5 Tempest energy kick. At the same time, his fist matched with Cancer's sword causing the Vice Admiral to retreat. But just then, Doberman rushed up again not giving Ross a chance to breathe as he needed to kill Ross here. Far away. Numerous Marines looked at this scene and their hearts were waving like waves. The Vice Admirals are injured, Ghost Hand Ross is also injured. He is Paramecia's Devil Fruit. The more he uses his Devil Fruit, the more stamina he will consume. It should be over soon. A lot of people murmured nervously, some glanced at them with open mouths, while others dialed Den Mushi and contacted several headquarters rear admiral who are protecting the battleships and told them to come and reinforce the vice admirals. On the field, Ross's stamina is near its end and the wound on his shoulder affected his actions. Under the aggressive attack of Doberman and others, he was constantly pushed back. It's really troublesome. He constantly resists the attacks of Doberman and others and there is a slight fluctuation in his eyes. These headquarters vice admirals are not only strong but their battle senses are also sharp. Looking at 3 headquarters vice admiral who were trying to make him use his stamina, Ross took a deep breath and his eyes shone cold. I didn't want to spend my free talent points but my stamina and fitness are still lacking if I want to defeat these 3 headquarters vice admirals. Bang! Ross blocked the attacking Manga with a punch, showed a little decisiveness on his face, and moved his mind to evoke the talent system. Activate the general talent, Tenacious. A translucent system interface appeared in front of Ross and he switched to the talents tree of the general department. As his mind moved, the branch named Tenacious was instantly activated in the branch of physical enhancement and then he put 40 talent proficiency points he obtained by killing Bartra. Buzz. Instantly, a warm current flowed from Ross's heart and through his whole body. His muscles, which had become somewhat weak due to overuse, were rejuvenated. The bloody wound on his shoulder, which had not yet scabbed, began to heal at a faster rate. As for the scabs on his fist, they were constantly falling off and recovering. Bang! Ross shouted angrily and he clenched his left hand and punched Doberman's sword which resulted in Doberman flying backward. Doberman thought that Ross's stamina was completely exhausted, so where does this strength come from which caused him to fly back and even made his arms numb? He wants to make a final struggle, don't let him escape. Cancer was also slightly surprised by Ross's sudden burst of power but quickly responded, shouting a warning to Doberman and Manga. The 3 men took a deep breath and all took their strongest defensive measures. They didn't intend to give Ross any chance to break through and rushed out. Central place. The heat flow in Ross is slowly receding. This heat has been strengthening his self-healing ability and he has recovered a lot of his stamina. With the talent of Tenacious, even if the power of distortion is overloaded, there is no need to fear serious unrecoverable injuries. His slightly closed eyes slammed open as he took a deep breath and looked at the 3 vice admirals who were rushing towards him. He slightly grinned and with a single thought, the power of distortion in his body broke out. The last struggle. No, 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 you're wrong. This will decide the final outcome. Take it. Bang. 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 The power of distortion broke out as he directly punched Doberman and Manga and he kicked Cancer on his chest. Dark prison. Meteorite array. In the next moment, the dark prison and the cracked earth filled with sand and gravel was manipulated by Ross, and the area with a radius of 60 or 70 meters fell into darkness in an instant. In the darkness, the earth breaks apart and rolls over and strikes in a chaotic way, like a meteorite belt in the sky. Damn it, how could he still have the strength to do? In the darkness, Doberman's pupils violently contracted and his observation hockey caught an attack coming from the front and he slammed his sword to defend against it. Bang! Under Ross's punch, he flies backward directly. His flighting route just ushered with two pieces of sand and stone more than 10 meters in diameter which were squeezed in the middle, and the rubble splashed in all directions and blood gushed out violently, dyeing the nearby stones red. Sensing that Doberman was in danger, Manga and Cancer both screamed and rushed to support him, but Manga was blocked by flying stones and had to make a path with his sword. Cancer alone rushed over in the dark. Ross looked at Cancer indifferently. He was the only person who could ignore the limitations of the dark cage because it was his own ability. Cancer can't hear Ross. Bang! A single full-powered punch caused Cancer to flew out, and the sword in his hand could no longer withstand the power of distortion and it broke from the middle. Of the three, Cancer was the most seriously injured. After his right arm was almost destroyed, his left hand was half weakened further with the loss of his sword, and at least 30 or 40% of his strength was cut off. He was no longer capable of confronting Ross, and at most, he will be able to restrain Ross for a few seconds. Impossible. How could he still have such power? When Cancer flies backward, his face becomes a little distorted. It's not unreasonable to believe that Ross's stamina was almost exhausted. How could he explode with such power? But no matter how unbelievable things are, they are placed in front of him. He flew out and landed in the chaotic rocks like an insect caught on the table. He was hit everywhere by countless rolling balls, and his blood spurted out and stained the ground around him red. The outside world. Ross's sudden burst of power shocked all Marine. Is it not over yet? It was at this time that Rear Admiral Strawberry and another Rear Admiral arrived from a distance. A total of 6 headquarters Rear Admiral were dispatched. 3 people were going to deal with Robin, Lafitte, and others, while the other 3 were on standby. After receiving information about current circumstances, one of the 3 was left behind on the ship to guard it, and the other 2 quickly came over. What is that? Strawberry looked at the dark cage and asked. A Marine captain next to him recovered from him dismay and quickly explained to Strawberry what had just happened and described the entire battle process. So, it has the ability to isolate sound and vision. Listening to Marine's captain explanation, Strawberry nodded and looked at the dark cage. He shook his head and laughed bitterly. Doberman's orders were conveyed in the beginning, but who could have imagined that it would cause such trouble in the future? Fortunately, it will all end here. The 3 vice admirals are here and the other ghost hand pirates are blocked on the island. It is almost impossible for them to get away. At the next moment, the dark cage in the field dispersed and light gradually returned to the dark area. It's over. The Rear Admiral watched the darkness fade and took a deep breath with cold eyes. But, almost at the next moment, his and Strawberry, as well as the expressions of the many Marines in the room, all solidified on their faces. The land in the field was already fragmented. It looked like a farmland that has been plowed many times. In this terrible battlefield, Cancer's body was lying on a piece of gravel and his face seemed to have an unbelievable look. Doberman and Manga, respectively, fell on both sides. Manga leaned on his sword and barely stood. He gasped violently. Blood spilled from the corners of his mouth and his arms trembled constantly. On the other side, Doberman leaned back against a raised rock and barely stood. His chest was collapsing as he struggled to breathe. Unacceptable. At this moment, he could not accept the result of battle in his heart. I didn't want to become a pirate. You forced me to become one. The sentence repeated by his subordinates seemed to have changed into Ross's voice, which echoed in his ears as if he had seen Ross say it indifferently in the blood and bones of West Blue. Did he decide the future direction of this sea? Don't make jokes. Doberman coughed violently. His eyes were trance, angry, regretful, and so on. All kinds of emotions erupted constantly and finally converged into a hoarse roar. No faith, no justice. Even if you grow up to the present strength, it's just an accident. Every pirate wants to dominate the future direction of this sea. Don't be kidding by telling me that it was I who decided the future direction of this sea. Ross stood there, slightly gasping, recovering his depleted stamina. He looked at Strawberry and another headquarters Rear Admiral who were coming towards him, and his eyes returned to Doberman and he said, "Well, you just watch. At least today, you couldn't make me fall here. Stimulating the remaining strength in his body, Ross displayed gravity distortion and floated up before crossing an arc in the sky as he flew away. Strawberry and another Rear Admiral looked at the scene, and their fingers on the hilt of their sword couldn't help but squeeze, but they didn't dare to pull their sword to stop Ross. Doberman lost consciousness, leaving only Momonga still standing there. He gasped violently until Ross flew away and spoke to Strawberry and the Rear Admiral with great difficulty. "You should stop him." When the Rear Admiral heard Momonga words, his face changed slightly and he shook his fist and said, "I will chase him." "Don't go." Momonga sat down slowly and watched the Rear Admiral before shaking his head and said, "The best opportunity has been missed, now we can't do anything." Having said that, he coughed twice and looked at Cancer's body, and he also looked towards Doberman, whose life and death were unknown to him, with a bitter bitterness on his face. "Give orders to retreat. Vice Admiral Momonga." They looked at Momonga with slight astonishment. Momonga shook his head slowly and said, "No more forced combat. It will only increase casualties and fail to defeat Ghost Hand Ross. The result of this encirclement and suppression is obvious: we failed." Great Age of Pirates on the 13th of June. The Marine Fleet, led by 3 Headquarters Vice Admiral, met the Ghost Hand Pirates in Springs Island, where Vice Admiral Cancer died and Marine Fleet collapsed. The news came out and shocked the world. 3 Headquarters Vice Admirals are really hard to deal with. Far away from the battlefield where he fought against the 3 Vice Admirals, Ross quickly landed on the ground, slightly staggering and muttering when he landed. At this time, the wounds on his shoulder and the wound on his fist had all healed up and almost all the bloody condensed blood had fallen off, but his forehead was covered with a drip of fine sweat stains due to excessive consumption of stamina. Doberman, Momonga, and Cancer were recently promoted Headquarters Vice Admiral, and there was still a slight gap between their strength and that of a veteran Vice Admiral who had at least 9 years of experience. If they were veteran Vice Admirals, then Ross would not have won even if he activated his tenacious talent. Even to the extent that, if they were Senior Headquarters Vice Admiral, then 2 of them would have been sufficient to completely subdue Ross. Anyway, I was able to defeat them this time. Ross slowly walked towards the shore where Ghost Shadow's ship was. The last bloody battle with Momonga and others had almost exhausted the part of stamina that had risen after he had activated the tenacious talent. Otherwise, he would not have noticed that the 2 Headquarters Rear Admirals were approaching and escaped directly. Headquarters Rear Admiral is still eligible to intervene with Vice Admiral's battle. Ross pushed himself to his limit to win this fight. If the Momonga and others have brought 2 additional Headquarters Rear Admiral, then the outcome of the battle would have been very different. Naturally. With gravity distortion's flying ability and his slightly faster speed than that of 3 Headquarters Vice Admirals, Ross immediately escaped with the help of his ability once he senses that he has no chance of winning. 3 Headquarters Vice Admiral can't stop him with flying ability at all. As for the activation of the tenacious talent, this is also within Ross's budget. He thought about whether to activate this talent a long time ago, but it has not been implemented. Physical enhancement is one of the 3 main talents of the General Department, which is a comprehensive enhancement of the body, while tenacious is a talent branch under the physical enhancement. Compared to physical enhancement, tenacious specializes in the stamina and resilience. It provides a big stamina boost to Ross, and it is also capable of bearing distortion power overload and healing Ross of any hidden injuries. There was no system sound in his ear that indicates to defeat of Marines, and he didn't get any rewards. Ross shook his head and felt his stamina recovering little by little. He took a deep breath and walked forward. On the coast, the Ghost Shadow ship is quietly docked on a sandy beach. On the side of the Ghost Shadow ship, there are a lot of Marine soldiers lying on the ground. The battle here is still intense. Marines' 3 Headquarters Rear Admirals led a group of elite Marines, and they are fighting against Lafitte and others. Although the Marines' side had lost a lot of soldiers, the current situation is very unfavorable for Lafitte and others. Both Lafitte and Robin have the ability to be fearless of ordinary army tactics. Marine initially swarmed in and suffered a big loss, but the 3 Headquarters Rear Admirals are not just simple Marines. Whiz. Whiz. Lafitte is moving like a ghost, and at the same time he occasionally fires his guns to support Robin as he fought a Headquarters Rear Admiral. Robin struggled under the attack of a Headquarters Rear Admiral. This Rear Admiral is a pure body type powerhouse and not a swordsman. The advantage is that he is not a big threat to her flower fruit. Hannah no mi. But the disadvantage is that she cannot defeat him by using her flower fruit. Hannah no mi. On the other side, Trafalgar Law joined forces with Shilu to fight the last headquarters Rear Admiral. Shilu is a sailor brought by Ross from the Sky Island. He has observation haki and strong physique. He uses an axe as a weapon and can withstand the attack of the headquarters Rear Admiral with Law's ability as support. However, Law is too young, and even if he is only supporting from the side and not fighting the frontal combat, he is breathing heavily and his forehead overflows with sweat. He took a deep breath and turned his wrists. Surgeon Fruit's ability was activated. He suddenly swapped the headquarters Rear Admiral location with the sand next to Shilu, causing the headquarters Rear Admiral to receive Shilu's big axe. Ching! The headquarters Rear Admiral, with a cold gaze, blocked the big axe with his sword, which resulted in him staggering slightly, and then he suddenly attacked Law with his sword energy. The sword energy cut a crack more than 10 meters in length on the beach, and Law did not hesitate to re-stimulate his ability to avoid the chop, but the sweat on his forehead was increasing. If it drags on like this, it will be more and more disadvantageous. He looked at the battlefield with great dignity. Robin and his side fought bitterly. If Lafitte hadn't intervened from time to time and provided some help, they would have been defeated a long time ago, and this continuous support also made it difficult for Lafitte to defeat the headquarters Rear Admiral quickly. It's all so hard here. Ross's troubles are probably even bigger. Law's heart sank to the bottom. He was indeed close to his revenge on Ross's ship, but the danger he encountered also increased a lot. Originally, he dealt with some bounty hunters at most, but now he was confronted with Marine Headquarters Rear Admiral. A character of this rank is someone he cannot defeat. If not for the abilities of Surgeon Fruit, he would not even have the qualification to intervene in this fight. Whiz! Whiz! 3 Headquarters Rear Admirals kept attacking, forcing Robin and others to resist passively. Only Lafitte could spare his hands, but he could not deal with 3 Headquarters Rear Admirals alone. And just as the situation became more and more unfavorable, Robin's Rear Admiral, who was trying to suppress Robin, suddenly heard the sound of the Den Den Mushi in his pocket. Huh? His brows were slightly wrinkled and his fists slightly paused. Instead of taking out Den Den Mushi, he tapped his pocket directly. Rear Admiral John, what's the situation there? It's almost over. John responded quietly as he kicked a chop at Robin. Not finished yet. A repressed and low voice came from the Den Den Mushi. After a pause, the voice became serious and said, Vice Admiral Manga has given his orders. Everyone will retreat immediately. The voice came from John's pocket and was clearly captured by Robin and Lafitte, who were present. Whoop! Lafitte was a little stunned and he did not know what to think, but after some time the corner of his mouth was raised in a strange curve and Robin's slightly dignified and tense expression was also slightly relieved. John and 2 other Rear Admiral heard the voice and all of them were stunned. Hey, what the hell are you saying? We will be able to defeat them in under a minute. Why are you telling us to retreat? Is this really Vice Admiral Momanga's command? Den Den Mushi's voice paused, seemingly hesitating, but did not explain the reasons for the retreat, but solemnly exclaimed. Do you want to question Vice Admiral's orders? The news that 3 Vice Admiral had been defeated by Ghost Hand Ross would be a devastating blow to Marine's morale, and he dared not announce it to the battlefield where John and others were. John listened to the harsh voice coming from the Den Den Mushi, but he could not help staring in place, somewhat confused for a while, and looked towards his other 2 companions. Both of them also showed a trace of confusion. Retreating at this time will give the Ghost Hand pirates a chance to breathe, and they may even escape by their ship. Their ship is extremely fast, and once they sail at the sea, Marines will not have any chance to capture them. Obey orders and withdraw. Although he didn't know what was going on, one of the Rear Admiral took a deep breath after a few seconds of silence, and he was quite clear about the seriousness of the crime of disobeying orders. John and the other man looked at each other and saw each other's eyes. After biting his teeth, he looked at Robin, who was standing not far away. His muscles were tense and he took a big step forward. At least let me capture the devil child, whiz. He used his full power to attack Robin. He was planning to knock her unconscious with a single attack and then capture her. Robin's eyes were fixed, her hands crossed in front of her chest and countless arms emerged, forming a huge palm blocking John. Bang! However, the huge palm was only a slight hindrance and was crushed by John's punch, turning into countless petals. John then rushed toward Robin. Room. Not far from the situation, Law saw Robin's situation and the demon knife in his hand moved as he used his abilities to try and save Robin, but as soon as his ability was released, a sign of collapse appeared and his ability collapsed. At the same time, Law's body also involuntarily fell to the front and he instantly fell to the ground in a kneeling position, barely clenching his sword for support. Did I overconsume my stamina? He felt the heavy feeling coming from his body and looked up at Robin. Whiz! Fortunately, Lafitte was there. He dodged and came to Robin, waving a red stick and stopped John. Whoop, if you hurt Miss Intelligence, Captain would be furious. John's face became gloomy as he watched Lafitte defending Devilchild and his companions did not deal with Lafitte. Captain? Your captain, I'm afraid he's been escorted to battleship now? After that, John shook his head and was ready to turn around. His companions were not going to help him and he could not deal with Lafitte alone and catch Devilchild. But at this time, he suddenly realized that something was wrong. Robin put her arms down and Lafitte took back this red cane and the corner of his mouth was slightly raised. Both of them were looking at something behind him. Not only Robin and Lafitte but also Law, who was half kneeling on the ground, and Shilu, with a huge axe, looked behind him. Law breathed softly, while Shilu grinned. In the eerie silence, John turned his head bit by bit and looked in the direction that Robin and others were looking at. At the end of the line of sight, on the beach about 100 meters away, a figure appeared and was walking slowly towards them. John's pupils shrank sharply when he saw the figure. He stuck in his voice with an impossible sound, and a cold feeling rose from his back. It's not just John, even his two companions, as well as the rest of Marine's soldiers, stared at the figure that came along, with an incredible look on their faces. Although the figure was slightly beaten up and there were blood spots on his body, but he was recognized by almost everyone here. He is the reason that they came here for. Ghost Hand Ross. How is it possible? Weren't the vice admirals containing him? How could he appear here? What happened to the vice admirals? John's face changed dramatically. At the same time, the other two rear admirals were also shocked. They suddenly thought of the inexplicable retreat orders. If Ross escaped from the encirclement, vice admirals would definitely chase him and remind them to be careful about Ross and stop Ross. But now, Ross is here and what they receive here is not a careful and blocked order, but an order to retreat immediately. What does this mean? The three rear admiral didn't dare to think further. They only felt that a cold feeling spread all the way from the soles of their feet to the top of their head. Looking at Ross, who was slowly walking towards them, 3 Headquarters Rear Admiral felt a little depressed and Marines felt a heavy pressure on his body. Retreat! Retreat! No one knows who shouted, but many Marines responded immediately and fled. John's heart beat violently several times, but he also retreated and rushed out trying to follow his two companions. But, just as he tried to escape, the beach in front of him suddenly picked up like a wave and swept across him. John's speed dropped sharply as his head crashed into the sand. He was shocked and struggled hard. He rushed out of the sand and headed upward on Geppo, moonwalk. But just then Ross's figure appeared in front of him, floating in midair, looking at him with indifferent eyes. John only felt a violent shock on his body and his heart felt like it would jump out from his chest. His whole body turned cold and he almost fell directly from the air. In horror, he used Geppo, moonwalk, to escape Ross, but Ross's fist has already fallen on him. Armed Tekai, Iron Body. John roared and utilized Tekai, Iron Body, from Marine's Rokushiki to its limit, along with armament hockey, and he raised his arms to try to block Ross's blow. Bang! Ross punched between his arms and a terrifying force rushed down, tearing apart John's defense. Even a Headquarters Vice Admiral, such as Manga, struggled to resist Ross's fist head-on and had to be back off to avoid it, not to mention a Headquarters Rear Admiral. Bang! John fell from the sky, accompanied by blood, and slammed on the beach, hitting the beach and creating a human-shaped crater as numerous rocks splashed around. The other two Headquarters Rear Admirals saw this scene from far away and their heart was filled with horror and fear. They didn't even dare to come and rescue their comrade and fled in the distance. One move to defeat John. Even Vice Admirals of Headquarters can't do it. Ghost Hand Ross is so powerful that it is hard to believe that he was just a small pirate hunter in the West Blue 2 years ago. Ross did not look at the other two Rear Admiral who had escaped. With his hands on his back, Ross floated back to the beach and headed for the boat. He felt a little stir and movement in the pit behind him. "It's for you, Lafitte." "Okay, Captain." Lafitte grabbed the brim of his hat and saluted Ross and then turned his cane towards the human pit. Ross, with his hands on his back, slowly climbed onto Ghost Shadow Ship and disappeared from the public's eyes. Robin smiled slightly and instantly relaxed. Not far away, Law breathed, sat on the beach and gasped. In a place where they can't see. Ross, who had just stepped into the cabin, stumbled and almost fell down. He barely stood on the bulkhead and restored a little stamina. He was almost empty on stamina just now. Otherwise, he would not leave the follow-up till a feat. No one can see it. Ross gasped violently for 2 times, then swayed back to his room, retreated from the cabin door and fell on the bed. It was the moment he opened the door that a familiar voice came to his ears. The Marine Headquarters fleet has been defeated and you are rewarded with 50 talent proficiency points. When Ross heard this sound, he could not help slightly twitching his lips. As a matter of fact, the system would not drill any holes for him. Even if 3 Headquarters Vice Admiral were defeated, they would still be settled according to a Vice Admiral reward as long as they belonged to the same queue. Plus the Vice Admiral award, which had been awarded once before, halved to 50. Well, forget it. Previously, he was worried that this time the system would judge that Marine fleet had not been defeated. So he would gladly take the 50 proficiency points. He only gained 40 proficiency points when he defeated his last pirate. With that in mind, Ross's mind moved and the system interface appeared in front of him, and after a little thought, he put 10 proficiency points in the General Department's Tenacious. The golden light flashed and the general panel changed subtly. Agility enhancement. 200, top-level strengthening. Physical enhancement. 350, top-level strengthening. Tenacious. 50, mid-level strengthening. The Tenacious talent was originally at 40 proficiency points and now with additional 10 proficiency points, it directly broke through to the level of mid-level strengthening and instantly made Ross's stamina and resilience strengthen again. Compared to the 2 major talents of physical enhancement and agility enhancement, Tenacious maximum value is only 200 proficiency points, while physical enhancement and agility enhancement maximum value are 500 points. In the talent system, the highest maximum value belongs to the distortion fruit, which requires 1000 proficiency points, while physical enhancement and agility enhancement require 500 points respectively. As for others like Tenacious, Armament Hockey, etc., their maximum value is 200 points. After the Tenacious talent reached mid-level strengthening, Ross noticeably felt a lot more comfortable with his heavy body. After a slight heat flow flowed through his body, he lay there. His limbs gradually recovered and the side effects from overloading his devil fruit power were gradually washed away. I don't know if I will get an immortal body like that of 100 Beast Kaido when Tenacious reached maximum value. Ross touched his chin and thought. Tenacious alone should not be enough. Physical enhancement should also be full and his basic physique has to be further improved for him to reach the physique of 100 Beast Kaido. Looking at Talent System's interface, after a little thought, Ross put all the remaining 40 proficiency points in the Distortion Fruit. Now he can overuse his power of the Distortion Fruit with the help of Tenacious talent. It is not necessary for him to upgrade his physical fitness this time. He will be able to bear the 40-point increase in the power of the Distortion Fruit. Buzz. A golden glow flashed, and Distortion Fruit's proficiency reached 445. After the upgrade, the full power of Distortion obviously exceeds Ross's current physical body, but he has the Tenacious talent. As long as the gap is not very large, even if his body is overloaded with the power of Distortion, he can gradually recover. Next time, an admiral will come after me. Ross turned over and looked at the ceiling while meditating. Vice Admiral of Marine Headquarters has been killed and Marine Admiral will surely be the next encirclement and suppression. Although his current strength is stronger than that of a senior Vice Admiral, there is still a huge gap between him and a Marine Admiral. At least another 200 or 300 talent proficiency points will be needed for him to have the qualification to fight an admiral. Before that, once he encounters an admiral, the whole ship will be crushed. No rest. No pleasure. It's like running on the road with a lion on his ass. Once he stops, he will become someone's dinner. Ross knows the danger of the road he has taken. For this reason, he has never stopped persevering since he was forced to take it because he will never fall halfway to rewrite the future direction of the sea. The pirate offering a reward of 100 million to 200 million berries is of little value now. There's no need to look for them one by one for the time being. After he enters the new world, they will be everywhere. In the first half of the Grand Line, the only valuable pirates are those who have a bounty of 200 million berries, and Shichibukais are also valuable, but I don't know if killing another Shichibukai will give me any rewards. Ross was thinking about his future and his targets. The talent system has never had any loopholes that he can exploit. It won't make it easy for him to extract a lot of proficiency points. His only advantage today is that his strength is above the hunting line. He hasn't killed any pirate with the bounty of 230 million berries, and with his current strength, defeating this level of pirates is nothing for him. Unless they are a pirate from the New World with a bounty of 300 million berries, no one possesses the strength to stop him. Don't let me down with the intelligence collection, CP9. Ross squinted and muttered. After defeating the fleet led by Headquarters Vice Admiral, he will face the most dangerous period of time. Once he can get through it and has the strength to escape in front of a Marine Admiral, he will finally have the capital to cross the sea.